What's the most interesting mental disorder you've come across? Medical doctor here, neurologist. Capgras delusion. The patient is convinced that a family member has been replaced by an imposter who's completely identical. For example, the patient will tell you the person sitting across from them looks exactly like their spouse, sounds exactly like their spouse, has all the memories of their spouse, but that's not actually my spouse. And the patient oftentimes isn't overly distressed by this imposter. In 20 years, I've only seen this condition twice. I was also going to write about Capgras delusion. I had a case a few years ago. In this instance, it was a mother who was under the false belief that her son was a clone. We had some success with atypical antipsychotics, and I helped her focus her energy on being a good mother to the kid, whether it was hers or not, because she could agree that the child was innocent and needed a loving home. Family support was also crucial. A psychologist here, not someone I worked with, but I did observe someone with alien hand syndrome. The patient's left hand would stroke her hair and pat her face, but was not under her control. Each episode would last about 20 minutes. Turned out the cause was a tumor. Amazingly, it didn't seem to cause her any distress. I once worked with a guy whose voices were positive, like a cheer squad. So instead of, "You're useless, no one likes you," his voices said, "You look amazing today. People think you're charming and funny." It wasn't great though, despite what you'd think. He has enough insight to understand that they were as much a hallucination as if they were giving negative messages, and he felt this crushing, overwhelming pressure that he couldn't live up to the incredibly high standards set by his voices. It was quite crippling for him, really. As much as, if not more so, than if the voices were negative or even benign. Foreign accent syndrome is rare, but absolutely fascinating. Yes, my parents have a friend, Native American, never left Canada. Got into a bad fight one night and got her head rocked pretty badly and was knocked out. When she regained consciousness, she had an English accent, and to this day she still has it. I know a lady who hit her head while using a trampoline and started talking with a deep German accent. She still has the accent, but went to a speech specialist to learn how to speak with an American accent to get her old voice back. Maybe if I knock my head hard enough, I can get an accent that will stop confusing our viewers as to where I come from. It's tempting, but I also like having brain cells, so I'll hold off for now. Mental health counselor here. The interesting one is schizophrenia with visual hallucinations. Most people with schizophrenia have auditory hallucinations. I didn't realize how much more unsettling the visual ones were. The client I had with this disorder used to see me and other people he knew. He called me up once, yelling at me for coming into his apartment early in the morning. Even if I told him otherwise, the experience of seeing me is very real to him. I can't imagine seeing people in my own home, especially at night. That would freak me the frick out. Lawyer here, I did about 10 years criminal law. I've had many clients with schizophrenia. Auditory hallucinations must be disconcerting and terrifying. Visual would also be awful, but the oddest one I've come across was olfactory delusions. Client who had a psychotic break and had a range of hallucinations telling her to hire a car and drive across the country ASAP. She was arrested doing 180 kilometers an hour through a country town, the speed limit was 60, on a major highway. When I came down to see her, she was obviously unwell, but she also kept sniffing my hand anytime I asked her a question. Later, when she was well again, she explained it to me. She remembered everything even though she had no history of mental illness prior to this time. Everyone bad, i.e. all of the police officers, smelled like rotting corpses to her at the time, but I knew I could trust you because you smelled like sunshine and flowers. This stopped along with her other hallucinations when she came out of psychosis. I never knew before then that delusional smells were also possible. Early on in my career, I worked at a planned community that functioned as a partial hospitalization program. One of the residents would bring magazines and newspapers he'd found to the main office floor every day. Sometimes he'd be upset, sometimes overjoyed, depending on the stories, because all of them were about him. I've never worked with someone with such delusions before or since. One day he was Michael Jordan offering to buy us cars. The next day he was the leader of the people behind September 11th trying to hide with us. He'd read his obituary, his wife cheated on him in a political scandal, he'd surveyed the Congo. We restricted and sorted his mail after the incident where he thought he was that terror leader, but he'd just find magazines through other residents or in the community. Phantom pregnancies are pretty fascinating. A woman can be so convinced she's preggers that her periods stop, she gets all the classic symptoms, and her belly might even grow. Nobody is totally sure how this happens. It's suspected that Queen Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary, experienced multiple phantom pregnancies. In one case, she went into confinement at around 8 months and didn't leave until the 11-month mark when it was clearly obvious there was no baby. It was probably the most humiliating moment of her entire humiliating reign. Her husband abandoned her, both the court and the people she thought she'd lost her mind. Bear in mind that she was likely too old to conceive by the time of her marriage, and her constant illnesses from a very young age over the stress about her mother and a bit about her father. There was no way she would have been able to have a normal pregnancy. Also, share psychosis is pretty crazy. There was a case a few years ago where twin sisters visited each other. One was mentally ill and the other one wasn't, and the ill one went into a psychotic state, and then the healthy twin suddenly, for no reason, went into the same state. They threw themselves into traffic multiple times, getting hit by trucks. After being separated at the hospital, the healthy twin snapped out of her psychosis and was fine. The other one stayed in her psychosis and ended up killing someone with a hammer, and neither of them remembered anything that happened. One of my old friends worked in a care home for people with various severe mental health disorders. One of the clients, lovely guy, pretty easygoing by the standards of that institute, had a rock-solid delusion that he was CEO of the company, and the reason that he was there was some sort of CEO check-in on that specific house. He'd basically gently chastise all the workers for their jobs or congratulate them if they'd done something correct. He'd talk about promoting people, stuff like that. It was always fun to hear the stories about that guy at the end of the day. My mum was losing it towards the end, plus she was finally diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She also had hallucinations. She was insistent that she worked for the care home she went to before hospice, and she'd tell us that her job was terrible there and didn't pay enough. She thought I was the nurse a couple of times before when she was staying with my brother. We pretty much went with it because it would make her upset if we didn't believe her. So I'd just listen like I was the nurse and then leave the room for a few minutes and come back and suddenly I was her daughter now. She called every nurse with brown hair by my sister's name. The sad part is we learned she had been seriously mentally ill for a very long time. We knew she was untreated for something but didn't realize how the hallucinations ruled her life. She was paranoid of peeping toms, so my dad would play along because that was likely the easiest way to deal with her. My poor dad. I always expected her to die first, but my dad went before my mum. Hemi-neglect is a pretty interesting one. The affected person just doesn't realize that they have two halves to their body and only take care of one. Shave one side of their face, brush their hair on that side, wash themselves on that side, and the other side basically becomes dirty mountain man. Social worker here, used to work at a psych hospital. Saw a form of OCD where the patient couldn't let go of anything she came across or made. Leaves, sticks, tampons, pads, fecal matter, some stored in Tupperware, some or most hidden where her feet went in her bed. We'd routinely have to go through her room and get everything removed. I don't remember how she did in treatment, but I remember that she was a teenager and I felt terrible that that's what she was dealing with. It seems incredibly unfair that people can just have this sort of condition their entire lives. OCD is treatable, but it seems like compulsions like this would be so hard to break, especially when they're kept hidden by the person doing them like this. Medical doctor here, not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I did encounter a pretty interesting patient case on my psychiatry rotation when I was in medical school. There was a patient at an inpatient psychiatric facility for self-deleting ideation. During her admission, she constantly insisted that she had a mass in her chest and demanded to be physically examined only by male doctors. When the psychiatrist I was rotating under declined to perform a physical exam, she asked me to do it during my daily patient interview. I also declined the physical exam, but had a bit of a hunch to check her medical records. It turned out that she had an ultrasound done a week before that found only normal tissue without masses. However, apparently this lady had frequented many doctors' offices with various complaints of an unspecific nature and would usually focus on her chest or downstairs area when she visited male physicians' offices. The psychiatrist I was working with diagnosed her with factitious disorder, formerly known as Munchausen syndrome, and also felt that she had a personality disorder. He felt it was a histrionic personality disorder, but also felt it was possibly borderline personality disorder. Definitely cluster B though. It seems her goal was to mostly get attention from medical professionals. She had a lot of issues, but we also had to be careful to make sure she wasn't fishing for a lawsuit. Patients like her are why doctors document everything meticulously, so the patient wouldn't admit to making things up all the time. According to the psychiatrist I was working with, she didn't actually believe any of her health problems existed, and her primary goal was the attention from medical professionals. If she actually believed she was sick, we would have diagnosed her with illness anxiety disorder, commonly known as hypochondria. Medical doctor working in inpatient psychiatric facility. We had a psychotic patient with visual hallucinations who saw colored dots all around him during episodes of distress. The great thing about it was, he told us he was able to blow the colored dots away. We encouraged him to do it as it seemed to greatly reduce his anxiety. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I never saw a patient with it myself, but I'm a nurse, and in the electronic medical world, we use walking corpse syndrome. It's always at the top of the diagnosis choice list. Apparently, it's when you're convinced that you're dead. Never understood why it was top of the list. I'm an EMT and I've come across this twice. The first person was oddly pleasant. The second person had hostile tendencies towards people who tried to get them to eat or provide medical care. They'd soil themselves because corpses don't have to go to the bathroom. Mental health counselor here. The most interesting disorder I've ever treated was dissociative amnesia. The guy had big edits out of his life that had him ending up in trouble with his girlfriend, and when I was seeing him was on the border of him getting in trouble with the law. I actually know of someone that suffers from something like this from PTSD. She was in the World Trade Building on September 11th, and she barely escaped before the building she was in collapsed. After that, she acted normal, but her eyes were blank and the way she talked felt pretty forced. Anyways, for about a year after that, she disappeared. Her family thought she was kidnapped because nothing was missing from her home but her car and a few things like some clothes. The police searched but gave up. Her parents had money, so they hired some PIs that ended up finding her a year or two later. She had moved cross-country under a new name. She doesn't remember a thing from right before September 11th until they found her. I haven't talked to my buddy in a couple of years, but last I heard she was making good progress with therapists. She even got married, but never moved back. I have always thought narcissistic personality disorder was fascinating. You have people whose bullcrap is right in front of them and they'll still tell you and truly believe that they haven't done a single thing wrong. I've got a guy now who cheated on his wife and he genuinely doesn't understand why no one trusts him. It's amazing. Dated a woman who wasn't diagnosed, but I suspect she had it too. Gaslighting was real to the degree where I'd only speak with her in writing, even in person, and she'd sit there and say things she wrote weren't actually written. She eventually admitted to gaslighting, so I'm unsure if it could even be considered NPD. She'd violently argue that she did say something she didn't say, or didn't say something she did. Even in writing. We'd both be there looking at what she wrote and she'd deny it. I'd record our verbal conversations and replay things that she'd said. She'd deny saying it even as we heard it. She'd play confused in a conversation and attribute the confusion to a convo to things never said. Literally. We'd review an entire conversation, never find out what she was complaining about, and she'd just break down, cry, and yell. Worst of all, she sent me a message on Ramadan saying, "With Ramadan approaching, if I ever wrong you, please remember you probably deserved it and may Allah forgive you for being annoying." Doctor training to be a psychiatrist here. I had a patient recently who was convinced he had fathered a child. He hadn't. He got in trouble because he'd go to this kid's school to try to contact him. Parents were understandably upset and had never had any contact with the patient previously. The patient believed that Stephen Hawkins had inseminated the mother by some sort of telepathic process he couldn't explain. Truly bizarre, and so far hasn't really gained insight with treatment. He gets very emotional thinking about his son. Still works full-time though, and in many respects leads a normal life. Amazing. Yeah, it's remarkable how, apart from these certain quirks, someone with a disorder is essentially just a normal, flawed person with one blinder or eccentricity in one part of their brain. There are certainly people with mental disorders who've never been diagnosed just because it either hasn't come up in too detrimental a manner or has been repressed by societal norms. I worked as a crisis worker as a behavioral health case manager for a year. There was a client there with intermittent explosive disorder, probably the most interesting client I've ever met. Would, as the diagnosis suggests, explode during an escalation. It was too much for us to handle, and the client ended up getting taken to the hospital. I was a support worker, and one case I had was a boy with pandas syndrome. It basically manifests as severe OCD. It can completely alter the personality of a child. This kid wouldn't leave his room, to the point where he'd just pee on the carpet. He'd scream obscenities to his parents for no reason. This was actually caused by having strep throat, except the bacterial infection didn't go away and it can turn into pandas. And the treatment is most often just a very specific antibiotic. But the children often need therapy to deal with the aftermath. Their personality goes back to normal, but it's very upsetting to go through. My sister had pandas. The tricky thing with finding out in her case, though, was that before and still she has severe anxiety, oppositional defiance disorder, major depression, and ADHD. Pandas was just increasing the severity of her already existing mental health conditions, and they only wound up figuring it out because of her other rare physical health problems she was experiencing. She did end up returning back to her own unique brand of normal, but it was a pretty hellish thing watching my family struggle until then. Pain conversion disorder. I had an ex-girlfriend that was in a wheelchair, but her parents and doctor said she could walk, but her legs wouldn't let her. Her parents said she might have woken up during a surgery she had when she was a kid, because it all started after that surgery. She even went to physical therapy for it for years, and she might still do that, I don't know, but she couldn't move around without the chair. Kind of, but she couldn't walk. So it was almost a disability, but not fully. Very confusing. She was supermodel hot though, and the coolest girl I've ever dated. I've worked with one client with legit dissociative identity disorder. She reported 6 personalities, but I only ever met 4. I'm worried to find out when the other ones come out. She was actually managing fairly well, but definitely better after some trauma work and a med regime. Still pretty wild when provocative Susie would show up and not normal, straight-up Susan. DID was always interesting to me when I was in medical school because the diagnosis is pretty controversial among psychiatrists. There seemed to be a great rise in diagnoses when it was portrayed more in the media, which points to a social contagion of some sort similar to how self-deletion, eating disorders, and self-scarring are contagious behaviors when exposed to them. I'd wager a good percentage of patients diagnosed with DID actually have borderline personality disorder because of the unstoppable identity those particular patients have. According to my professors in medical school, bipolar patients are particularly vulnerable to social contagions. Selective mutism intrigued me. They have anxiety to the point where they don't speak. Happened to my mother's granddaughter. After my mum died, she drew a painting of my mum, her grandmother, saying how nice she was to her. I wish she was able to say that to her in person. However, the condition is, as I understand, related to an anxiety disorder. Jerusalem syndrome, where a person who visits the Holy Land is convinced they are Jesus. It typically goes away once the person leaves. Maybe every single one of these people with the syndrome was actually possessed by our Lord and Savior. I am joking, but it's interesting that it keeps happening. I knew a guy who claimed to be the Lord for a while. Turns out he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. I'm a licensed medical psychologist now, but before I went to graduate school, I worked in an inpatient mental health hospital on adult and adolescent units. I'd say the most interesting 2 disorders I've seen are dissociative fugue and conversion disorder. I saw both while I was there. Dissociative fugue is a condition where someone can wake up one day and believe they're a different person for a short time. My experience was a man who woke up and drove his car from his home until it ran out of gas, which happened to be in my city. He had no ID with him, and I don't remember his name, family, or any details of his life. After a short stay in the hospital and some meds, he remembered everything and had a family member pick him up and monitor him for a while. But he still had to put gas in the car, which had been towed to the hospital parking lot. Conversion disorder is characterized by the individual losing the ability to do something, like walking, seeing, or talking, and believing that has a biological component. In reality, it's a response to significant trauma and is dissociative in nature. A woman in the hospital manifested the symptom of losing her ability to walk while she was there. There was no reason as to why she wasn't able to walk. She came in walking, was unable to ambulate while there, and left walking again. My mum had paranoid schizophrenia and would eat Vicks out of the jar to coat her brain so the Protestants couldn't hear her thoughts. She was Catholic. My dad was Protestant and became Catholic to marry her. Hear me out, maybe not the most interesting disorder, but interesting in prevalence is GAD. About 40% of men and 50% of women suffer from it in my office. The Western ideals of hard work, keeping up, pulling non-existent bootstraps is mentally harming everyone. It's a serious frickin' problem that the government and Big Pharma like to profit from. It's interesting because it's so disgusting. Humans aren't designed to be pulled in 30 different directions, but that's what modern society expects, and it's killing us all. My friend has complex regional pain syndrome. She experiences non-psychogenic hallucinations as part of that pathology. She's completely aware that there are hallucinations and has no psychosis. She sees white tigers, angels, and demons. The white tigers apparently have a thick and luxurious fur that's wonderful to touch. It's a horrible condition, but that aspect of it she really likes. Psychiatrist here. One of my most interesting cases was Cotard's syndrome. I was an intern and ended up seeing the patient on the inpatient unit and later in the state hospital. Had the delusion that he was dead. You'd ask him how he was doing, and he'd shout, "I'm burning in hell!" My other favorite is a patient who had the delusion of pregnancy and thinks she's pregnant with over 50 babies at the same time. I'm only a psychology student, so I haven't seen any patients yet. But one of the most interesting mental disorders I've studied is prosopagnosia. It's the inability to recognize faces. But the thing that fascinates me the most is the fact that someone with prosopagnosia will be able to recognize others by some distinct characteristics, like a mustache or the voice, and won't be able to recognize them if they shave or don't talk.
People who quit their jobs in a blaze of glory. What's your story? I used to work recording concerts for a school conservatory. Basically, students would pay a fee for the conservatory to record their concerts and put them on CD for them. I had had the job as a work study since I was a freshman, and I loved it. In the second half of my senior year, I received a call from my boss saying that I messed up on a CD and that I needed to meet with him in the studio to fix it at 4 p.m. I thought it was an odd request. Mistakes sometimes happen, but all of the employees knew how to fix them themselves, and I was the most experienced worker that they had at that point. I asked if I could just fix it earlier and submit it to the office assistant, but he insisted I come in at 4. I showed up about 15 minutes before 4 to figure out what had gone wrong. I put the CD in and immediately could hear that it was a CD of a completely different concert. That was really bizarre, but we have backups of all the audio, so I just burned another CD of the correct concert from that. As the CD was burning, my boss came in and told me that I was fired. He told me screwing up a CD that badly was unacceptable. I had never been fired before. This was the longest job I had ever had, and I was totally blindsided. To this day, I have no idea how the wrong concert ended up on that CD. The best I could figure is that the office assistant mixed up the CDs or something, but whoever's fault it was, it had a really easy problem to fix. I argued with him for a bit by telling him that I thought he was making a big mistake, and this really wasn't a huge deal. But he refused to listen. Just when I resigned myself to my fate, the newly burned CD popped out of the computer. We both looked at it for 5 seconds in silence. Then I laughed, handed it to him, and shook his hand and then walked out the door. I wasn't done though. I loved that job and I felt wronged. I was also saving up for a trip to Europe and I didn't want to have to cancel it. I had already had my tickets to Waken. Without a job or a girlfriend, I had a lot of time on my hands that semester. So I decided I would just start my own business recording students' concerts using my own equipment. I charged slightly lower fees than my former employer and put ads online and around the conservatory. I advertised that I was more experienced than anyone working at the conservatory audio, and frankly, my equipment was better as long as they weren't playing one of the big venues, especially for jazz shows. Also, instead of burning CDs, I offered my clients to just send them the audio digitally, which a lot of students preferred because they would just get it within an hour or so after the concert had ended rather than several days later. College kids are cheap, and it didn't take long before I had to hire my own assistant to keep up with all the concerts that we were recording. I probably ended up cutting the conservatory's audio department business by 20%. My former boss was livid, and he made a couple of unsuccessful attempts to shut us down. I had earned more money that semester than I probably had in my previous 3.5 years combined of working for someone else. I was just mad at myself for not doing this earlier. The only problem is, I don't feel comfortable putting that job on my resume anymore. I know that feeling. I can't use my last job as a reference either, but I'll be telling my story later on in this video. Not me, but my dad. He was a partner in a software company and they were undergoing a merger. There was a ton of confusion in the move, and one guy was trying to take advantage of the situation. He was from the other company. He fired my dad for no reason. However, my dad was really well liked at his company. So much so that many of the employees from his company walked out of the building when he left with his stuff. One guy apparently came running down to the parking lot because he realized the guy that fired my dad did not have the authority to do so. My dad put his things in the car, goes back upstairs, fires the guy who tried to fire him, and then quits. I don't know if this is a blaze of glory, but it made me feel good. I got a job in a big city. My new manager said that she wanted to give me a 2-week trial period because she just wasn't sure about me. This manager was a total B. constantly yelling, expecting us to work through lunch, work late, and come in early. Had sessions in her office about how awful we were. I was miserable and the job was hell. The Friday of the end of my trial period, my manager called me into her office. She said that she was pleasantly surprised at how good I was and that she definitely wanted to keep me on. I told her that unfortunately she had not passed my trial period and I would not be staying. When I walked out, it was the best elevator ride down to the lobby ever. People often forget that employment is a two-way street. It's always refreshing to remind them of that. When that boss said there was a trial period, my brain was like, I would have told her she's on my trial period too. Glad the OP did that in the end. I drove for about 4 hours for a job interview that was right out of grad school. Nice place, working environment seemed a little tense, but that's alright. This was an animal shelter in the Midwest. The owner asked me to clean a cage for him. I said sure, doctors have to clean out cages every once in a while. It takes about 10 seconds. Then he asked me to hang out for a second while he talked to a client. I said sure. He told me to just keep cleaning the cages. I thought he was kidding. A technician walked into the room and asked me why the cages weren't done. I shrugged. From her attitude, I gathered that he wasn't kidding about the cages. After a wait in excess of 20 minutes, I just left. Got a phone call about 5 minutes later. I didn't answer it. Wait, he was making you clean cages during a job interview? What? There are so many things wrong with that. Free labor? What a turd move. Probably just didn't want to do it themselves. It's also illegal. I was a server in a really crappy restaurant. It was owned by a husband and wife. The wife was truly in charge and responsible for actually getting almost everything done. The husband was a hot-headed jerk who would show up from time to time to kick the cook out of the kitchen to play chef himself. He was a terrible cook. His wife did her best to just keep him out of the restaurant altogether, but he was a jerk and he did as he pleased. Luckily, he was also lazy, and restauranting is work, so he wasn't there often. Anyways, one day on a slow morning, when I was the only server, he came in to cook breakfast and was just ruining everything. He was smoking a cigar in the kitchen, using way too much grease and just burning everything. Customers would order scrambled eggs and bacon. How hard is that? And he would give me a blackened mystery substance dripping with grease to bring to their table. I refused. He screamed at me within earshot of the customers and told me that he was the restaurateur, not me, so I better do as I was told. So I took that crap food to the tables. They complained and asked me to replace it while looking at me like they couldn't believe that I would bring such food to their table in the first place. I brought it back to the kitchen and Hothead couldn't believe that they didn't want it. He doesn't believe me and yells at me some more. I am not about to bring the same food out to that table, so I refuse and tell him to do it himself. As you can imagine, he did not like that very much and he let me know very loudly. But he did take the food out to them. They gave him the same response they gave me, and he shouted at them. He shouted a whole rant at them about how they had no idea what food was, and that he grew up in Greece where food was an art. And he went to school and owned a restaurant, so what credentials could they have? Who are they to question food? He told them this restaurant was only for people who truly appreciated food and that they could go eat elsewhere. They did leave in silence. I think they were too shocked at what had just happened to come up with a rebuttal. When he came back from his incident with them, he told me that I was on thin ice and he didn't care for the backtalk I had given him. He said if I didn't like how he runs things, I should just leave. I was the only server in that place, and I was so pissed off I couldn't see straight. And he had just told me to leave if I didn't like how he operated. Well, I didn't like how he operated, so I left. He must have not realized that there were no other servers, because I immediately got a voicemail about how it was all a misunderstanding and I should come back because they were busy. How they were busy, I don't know, and everything would be all right. Luckily, I was working 2 jobs at the time, so I had the option to just pick up more hours at my other job. I didn't answer his calls until hours later when the voicemail started sounding really desperate. All I said was I can't talk because I was working my other job and I'm not coming back, so stop calling. I heard from ex-coworkers that his wife came in shortly thereafter, cried uncontrollably, and closed the place down for the rest of the day. That did make me feel bad because she was a nice lady who worked really hard, and I can only imagine how hard it was to try and run a restaurant with a husband like that. If that man is like that in public, I would hate to see how he is in private. I feel bad for that wife. I was an investigative reporter in Cleveland and had turned in a solid story about State Senator Kevin McLaughlin using his campaign finance money to buy Ohio State game tickets and hotel rooms for his mistress. It was approved by the editor and publisher, but the CEO, Matt Haggerty, spiked it when Coughlin threatened a lawsuit. I told him to go screw himself on the conference call with his people, before security escorted me out of the building. I sent the spike story to everyone in my Rolodex. It circulated the state house, and a couple of weeks later, Coughlin dropped out of the race for governor. I sued the paper and Coughlin for wrongful termination. Coughlin agreed that he never had grounds for a lawsuit, and I settled with the company. Slate and a few other publications wrote about my graceful exit. 10 out of 10 would tell him to screw himself again. This is the reason why we need journalists. They tend to get a bad rap, but who else watches the watchers? One of my first jobs was part-time at some small-budget supermarket. The boss was a wanker of severely limited intelligence, assigning me far more shifts than I agreed to and spending the entire day shouting at everybody, rather than doing actual work. Turns out I was also getting €1 less per than agreed upon. I noticed that after a month when I finally got my first paycheck. Not cool, grounds enough for me to terminate my work contract with immediate effect. So I got myself a new job, typed out my notice, put it in my coat pocket, and waited for the worst possible moment to quit. The moment came 2 weeks later. My boss and I were opening on a Saturday, and it just so happened that the cashier that was supposed to come in an hour later called in sick. He tells me and goes off on a tirade about how the shift is going to be hell with just the two of us. I smile, hand in my notice, and stroll out of the store without saying a word. Best feeling ever. Was working as a busser at Outback in college, animation major. Was there roughly 6 months. Never called out, always came in when asked to. Finals were coming up, and I was slightly behind on my final project. Called the manager 3 days in advance. I needed a day off I was scheduled for. Told me I had to get it covered. No problem. I called all the other bidders and even 2 hostesses. No one could or would do it. Called the boss back. His response, and I quote, "You need to decide right now what's more important, school or your career." I exploded on the guy with the easiest decision I've ever made in my life. I never understood the school versus career comment. Are people stupid enough to think people just go to college for fun and are not trying to get a better career? Not a blaze, more like a slow burn. Used to be a Comcast tech, put in my 2 weeks notice and got as many parking tickets as I could. The tickets couldn't be pegged to me because I don't own the vehicle. Comcast has a policy that employees need to pay their own parking tickets, but by the time Comcast got the tickets in the mail, I wouldn't have been an employee anymore. And you know the phenomenon where work vehicles can park wherever they want and not get a ticket? That doesn't apply to vehicles that say Comcast on the side. I still imagine the curses made in my name after they uncovered the extent of my evil plot. Wasn't me, but I was a department supervisor at a Best Buy for a while back in the early 2000s. We had 10 rows of various software. The store manager always had this one employee rearrange the planogram each week. It sucked. The dude had enough. He farted into the overhead intercom, shouted, "Eat my junk!" and shoulder blocked the software rack to the ground. Knowing I was going to have to clean it up, I was never more pissed at a person. Looking back, never more impressed. Bumped into him last year at the same Best Buy. He smiled and said, "Looks like they stopped selling software." I'm not gonna lie, the farting into the overhead comm got me. I worked at a technical support call center for almost a decade. The average burnout time or turnover was in 6 months. I was sitting in a meeting. They were ragging on us for sending out too many boxes. The week previously, we were sitting in the exact same room being ragged on for not sending enough boxes. I had a rough year, and I was just sitting there dying inside. I had this sudden epiphany. Every day since I walked into the door of that place was worse than the last. There was literally no reason for me to be there. That thought had just popped into my head like a light bulb went off. I got up in the middle of the meeting and just walked out without a word. The SDM that was giving the meeting just had their mouth hung open. He wasn't used to the drones doing things like this. He started after me and I ignored him. I went back to my desk and gathered up some things, gave a few other things to some people, and gave a goodbye email. The whole time the SDM was getting more and more agitated trying to talk to me, eventually yelling. I just ignored him like a bad smell at a dinner party. So I just went home. They called and called for days. Eventually, a supervisor that had me on Facebook messaged me. He was an okay dude, and I told him flatly that I was not returning. He said that we had a lot of paperwork to do and an exit interview and so on. I said no, I wasn't going back on that floor. I wasn't going to sit in an office like a bad teenager in the principal's office. It was over, I was done. We finally agreed to meet downstairs in an empty cubicle. I flatly didn't agree to anything, didn't sign anything, and just gathered whatever stuff they had for me and I left. For near a decade, they dictated everything in my life. My sleep schedule, my family life, holidays. They went so far as to time the seconds of how long I was in the bathroom during the day. That was all over. They had no more control over me, and I enjoyed making that clear. A call center is the worst job I've ever had, and I worked as a plumber one summer. Why not end this video with a personal story? Because I made sure that the people at my old job would remember me quitting. So first, I have to give you a little backstory. I worked at my old job for 8 years. It was a full-time gig at an automotive plant where we did a lot of testing on different vehicle parts. It was a place with a lot of lifers. They like to complain about how young people didn't want to work anymore, because the job also had a lot of turnover. But if you were like me, someone who could be counted on, came in on their days off, and actually did their job well, you had a lot of freedom at the company. Well, after I learned how the politics of the whole company worked, I quickly became known as the guy that would speak up about problems in the workplace. A lot of those lifers would just say that I was complaining and I didn't want to do the job. Well, I didn't hear those same people complaining when I pointed out that the whole company wasn't paying overtime correctly for the last 2 years, and magically, everyone just got crazy overtime checks to fix the mistake. I guess I'm just lazy though. The job was mostly boring and I often dreaded going to work. But I stayed at the job so long because it was easy, the pay was good, and I just started taking my laptop to work to edit my YouTube videos. Since I was counted on so much during my shift, I was given a lead position and I worked directly with supervisors to make sure we took care of all the necessary problems. Well, after some drama in the workplace, we had a new shift manager that oversaw all 3 shifts, who was also a lifer. We will call them Billy Bob, and I have to say, dude was pretty cool until he wasn't. You see, one day, I was going to go on vacation and I noticed that there wasn't going to be a lead operator in charge while I was gone. So I said to Billy Bob, yo, I have scheduled vacation next week and there isn't a lead for the shift scheduled, so you're gonna have to figure that out. There was no aggression or sinister tone behind those words or anything. But I do remember him giving me this weird look, which I thought was odd because I was just letting my boss know that there was something that needed to be solved or there might be problems later. I should also mention that I was taking this vacation to burn my personal days because I was on the verge of quitting that job. I, for many years, wanted to make the leap into content creation full time, and I felt like the job was holding me back. Plus, my job also had this dumb rule of, if you don't use it, you lose it, when it came to vacation time, so I wasn't going to give them free days after working all those years. Well, when I returned from my vacation, I had officially made up my mind that I was going to put in my 2 weeks, and I told this to my shift lead, and he was like, are you serious? Because that saves me from having to have a talk with you. I was like, for what? Well, apparently you pissed off Billy Bob before you left by saying he needs to figure something out. And he went straight to HR and tried to find some dirt on you. Then he went and pulled all of your time cards and said that he found some issues. So now you have a meeting scheduled on Monday with HR, him, and other management. Are you serious? That's petty as hell. But you know what? Tell them I'm down for the meeting. I can't wait. By the way, those issues they found were that I wasn't working full-time hours because this was during COVID and they cut our hours down to 32 hours a week and specifically said that people could leave if it was slow and we had coverage. So I left a lot with my boss's approval. Anyways, what I need to let you guys and gals know is I can be really cool to work with. As long as you do your job and you don't make my job harder, we will be best friends. But the moment you try to screw me over, I will become your worst enemy. When you have worked at a place for 8 years with a bunch of dudes that like to gossip more than a high school cheerleading squad, you get a lot of dirt on people that you work with, and I had a lot of dirt on this shift manager. So when word got around that I was quitting and that I was happily waiting for this HR meeting because I had a few things to bring up, well, after that was known, the HR meeting magically disappeared. Well, he's quitting in 2 weeks anyways, so why even bother meeting with him? Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I had an employee that was abusing their time cards, I wouldn't want them to stick around at the company any longer than they needed to be. But hey, that's just me. So since I didn't get a chance to get my revenge, I decided why not make the day I quit memorable. So over the next few days, I hatched a plan to make sure that I left my mark on this job that I had spent almost a decade at. First off, with TikTok being all the rage, I decided to make a video that I would upload the day I quit. Secondly, I wanted to leave something behind that would have people be reminded of me when I'm long gone. So I made some stupid meme stickers that I hid all around the campus of my work. Each sticker had me doing some kind of dumb expression. For example, I made this stupid one that said, "This clock needs new batteries, or you just learned that time moves slower here," which was obviously hid behind a time clock that I stared at for years. Another one said, "Hey, stop peeing back here." And I hid that outside because we once had a problem where workers were pissing on company property instead of in the bathrooms. But my favorite of the 5 stickers that I made said this: "What are you doing down here? Looking for a raise?" And I stuck it right under my shift manager's desk. Lastly, I plan not to finish out my 2 weeks. Our pay period ended on Saturday and I decided, you know what, I think I'll leave on Saturday instead of working another week. So on my final day, I texted my shift lead and my shift manager that today was going to be my last day, and I made sure to use the words, "You don't have a lead for tomorrow, so you're gonna have to figure that out." And I just left my job. Oh, and that TikTok that I mentioned, it was of me going around my whole workplace flipping off every camera that they had installed on campus. I even got in a golf cart and drove around the building to hit all the outside cameras. Last time I checked, that video had like 70,000 views on TikTok, and the day following my graceful exit from the company, I had a lot of people texting me that they saw it, and one particular manager wasn't happy, on top of needing to scramble to find some coverage when I decided to quit on the weekend. My friend also told me that upper management blocked anyone from seeing the cameras because they didn't want anyone knowing what I did on campus. Oh, and to my knowledge, only 3 of the 5 stickers I hid have been found 2 years later. All in all, I can say that I've never been happier since I quit that place.
Truckers, what creepy things have happened to you while you were parking overnight somewhere? Pulled over for a break on the way to Melbourne from Sydney at a truck stop. No streetlights or anything, pitch black. No other trucks or cars at the stop. I turn off my lights. I switch the truck off, do the curtains, lock the truck from both sides, jump into bed, set my alarm, and set my phone above me in the compartment. I was rolling over from side to side for around 5 to 10 minutes. I couldn't get to sleep due to it being prime summertime temperatures, reaching around 30 degrees at night. I'm looking up at the ceiling, mentally planning out the day ahead. Suddenly, the passenger side door opens up slightly. Cabin lights turn on. What the frick? Now, the truck is a fairly late model and in pristine condition, so there's no question about door being faulty or anything. I just sat there for what felt like an eternity, expecting someone to come up and see me sitting there with the solid rod in my hand we use for tightening belts. No one came up, nor was there any noise at all, just quiet, eerie silence. I grabbed my torch and jumped down, walked around the truck. No other trucks were around, nor were there any cars. It was just me and my fully loaded B-double. After around 5 to 10 minutes of getting screwed around with, I locked up and went to bed again. Woke up the next morning, yawned, fixed myself up along with the bed, opened the curtains, and FML, there's a cemetery next to the stop where I parked. Hunger and laziness all escaped upon realization. Grabbed the keys, screw-putting my shoes on, screw-putting pants on, switched the truck on, and just got the flip out of there ASAP. I have an Aussie story for you. My friend's dad was a trucker out of Perth, and this is the only story I've heard that's really given me the creeps. So he's driving back to Perth in convoy with a mate of his, back to back, through the Nullarbor. If you know anything about Aboriginal legend, the Nullarbor is where the ancestors' spirits walk, and also prime Yowie country. They radio each other because they realize they need to rest up and decide to sleep through to dawn and make Perth in the morning. So they pull over in the middle of the vast nothingness, lock up, and hunker down for the night. At some point in the blackness, my friend's dad wakes up with this intense feeling of being not just watched, but stared down. He's not a superstitious guy either. He's a proper no-nonsense countryman. He says he just had this gut feeling that something was out there and wanted him gone. He says he scrambles up to the cab and checks his keys and turns his lights on. And at that exact second in the middle of the night, his mate does the same. Both trucks roar into life, and they take off down the highway without a word spoken between them. Later, his mate says he felt the same predatory state and fear for his life, so hard that he'd have just gone too. I don't know how true it is, but it's a good story and pretty creepy. I understand that in the past my faux Australian accent has led to some mixed reactions in my previous videos, which delights me. However, I really didn't think it could stand up to 2 longer stories from Australia in a row. I'll get you next time, Aussies. I used to haul saltwater off of well sites in Oklahoma on the night shift. I was standing at the rear of my trailer as I was loading out in BFE somewhere when I heard gravel crunching like someone was walking toward me. Got that feeling where you feel like you're being watched. Stepped around the trailer toward the sound and shined my flashlight at a cow licking the side of my trailer.
I am cow, and when it's late, and all the men have parked their freight, and when I find a man who's stuck, I walk right up. I lick the truck.
Back when my dad was a truck driver, he stopped to sleep in a lot one night. The guy he leased his truck from happened to see him parked there, and in the morning when my dad went to the restroom, this guy used a spare key and hid in the sleeper. Once my dad was starting to leave, the guy reached out and grabbed him. My dad said he freaked out, so he just bailed out of the truck. It was moving around 5 miles per hour. My boyfriend is a truck driver who routinely does midnight runs. Oddly enough, I asked him this question myself a few days ago. He told me that one night he was getting ready to park in a lot next to a truck stop. He said it looked like there were no lights, no cars, no sign of anyone, but he said, screw it, he was tired. He woke up the next morning parked on the side of the road with 3 highway patrol vehicles behind him. He was about 15 miles away from the truck stop he had parked at. Thing is, he was sleeping in his camper the whole night. He has no idea how he got to the side of the road, and logic says someone tried stealing the truck and succeeded. And the police convinced him of this happening as they saw a man in a black jumpsuit running away from the truck into a nearby field. Even then, he still feels uneasy about the whole situation. Apparently, the doors were still locked from the inside and there was no real sign of anyone trying to break in. Just a few extra details I thought I should add. The police did breathalyze for alcohol and it came up clear. Even more unsettling is that he puts his keys in the same place every night, which is next to his handgun in one of those metal boxes, which remained untouched. Also, the police officers could not locate where the man in the jumpsuit was, or could have gone. It was an open field with no building in sight. And they didn't actually stop the truck or see it moving. The only reason they decided to check on the truck was because of a call they received from a worried woman. Everyone was weirded out, couldn't really issue any real fines, so they let my boyfriend leave. 2 stories. Maybe not winners, but creepy overnight parking for sure. I was really new to the business and had parked at a stop in Texas en route from one place to another. It was August. There was nothing unusual about the situation. I was in the middle of a parking lot with about 70 other odd truckers. I woke up with a start 6 hours later to the truck shaking and rolling, hellacious noise all around, and a psychedelic light show blasting me from every direction. It was a severe thunderstorm that I'd no idea was coming. Wind, pounding rain, thunder, and lightning to beat hell. Being in a truck during a storm is closer to being in a tent than in a house. I'd never experienced it before, and even though I grew up with this kind of severe weather, I lay there in this tossing, heaving sensory party going, I don't even know where I'd go right now to get safe if I had to. Hell, I don't even know how to find out if this is a severe or regular or a tornado. I was really tired the next morning. I parked for the night somewhere in southwest Michigan on the way to Grand Rapids. Again, a truck stop full of trucks. Shut down and went to bed. I woke up looking at one of the cabin lights, which was on. I think, fell asleep with the lights on again, genius. Then, freeze. The light I'm looking at only comes on if you deliberately turn it on, which I never did. Or if the door is open. Just then, I felt the slight roll of the cab that's telltale whenever someone is climbing up. I wish I had some heroic Rambo crap I could claim I did, but I can't. I yelled. Now, I can make myself heard in a very loud environment pretty easily, and this was the dead of a quiet night, and I yelled, "Get out!" loud enough to send Legion into the Gerasene pigs. There was a frenzied scrambling and the truck rocked some more. Then I hear a very small woman's voice, "I'm sorry, I got the wrong truck." Nothing from me for a second, then, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, just get the F out of here." Moral of that story, lock your doors. She was either a driver or a working girl, and it doesn't matter because either way, she got the wrong truck. Loud enough to send Legion into the Gerasene pigs is my new and favorite way to say something is the extreme opposite of silence. I was at the Petro in western Memphis. I had dropped the loaded trailer and bobtailed to the truck stop and parked in bobtail parking at the Petro. I was pretty tired but hungry, so I went in, got a meal and walked out and opened the door to my truck and started climbing up. I looked up right into the face of a guy grinning at me. I was in the wrong truck. I had parked next to him. We both drove for the same mega carrier, so the trucks were identical. He had watched me go in and knew what was up. We both had a good laugh about it, and I went to my truck and crashed. If the storyteller is anything like me, the realization of the mistake was probably preceded by at least 20 seconds of high-pitched screaming when he climbed into bed to a grinning face. No, thank you. A couple years ago, I was sleeping in my van in North Hollywood after getting off of work. I had the seat folded down and a long plywood plank with a mattress on top of them. So I was elevated at the windows level, but they were tinted. Woke up one night and was startled by a guy standing outside staring into the van and talking to himself. I realized he wasn't trying to look in, but was looking at his reflection. I don't know how long he had been there, but he was there for another 15 minutes until he staggered off. Have a trucker story from the extended family. An uncle used to drive a lot, and he always came back with the most weird stories ever. While every family member knew his stories, there was one story he told and warned about, even to me when I was 6 or so. Moral of the story is to never stay the night in the desert alone. It seems once he drove to Chile, he had a contract, and the way there was okay. I made the travel myself later in life. It's beautiful. Whenever he was done, he usually spent a few bucks on booze, but this time, due to the family gathering, he wanted to come back as soon as possible. So instead of drinking in some bar, he decided to sleep a bit at the Atacama Desert. Well, it's a desert, and he had parked way outside the road and a few miles before the next village. He sleeps and wakes up to someone singing. He's confused and thinks it's the radio, but the radio is not on. Then the singing stops and it sounds more like a scream for help. That's when he wants to get out and help, but he is still confused. He said he started the motor and the lights to see where and who was there, but he also did open the window a bit and yelled, asking what happened. It was nothing, and right then when he decides to get out anyway, he catches a movement in the corner of where the lights end. It looked like a woman, but the face was pitch dark. He freaks out and drives away, non-stop until he reached home. Whatever he saw or thought he saw, every time he told the story, his face went pale. Even my grandmother commented on how he was usually a very jolly guy, but whatever happened in the Atacama Desert freaked him totally out. Like most people here, this didn't happen to me. One of my good friends from middle school had a stepfather who was a truck driver for a good amount of time. He was a tough son of a B-word. I never saw him not look like he could kill someone. Except one time when he told us why he stopped driving trucks. He was on a long trip from somewhere down in Texas to Boise, Idaho. By the time he hit the freeway close to Boise, he had already been up for 24 hours. Either way, I don't believe he could have seen this coming. Outside of Boise, he was driving, late at night, at the fastest legal speed, when out of nowhere he sees someone sit up straight in the middle of the road. He didn't have enough time to hit the brakes, not that it would have helped. She was decapitated on the spot. He later found out she was tweaked out. I don't think even if he wasn't sleep deprived, he would have seen her lying in the road. From what the police could gather, she walked out there, sat down, and eventually fell asleep in the road. No one knows who she was or how she got that far out. One of my trucker friends has a story about spending the night alone in a rural stop in the middle of Maine winter. She had a bit of an uneasy feeling about the place but couldn't put her finger on anything and needed badly to rest, so she stayed. Perfect Stephen King setup, right? She's usually a very solid sleeper but wakes up around 3 a.m. that night. She's not sure what woke her up, until she notices that the cab is very slowly and gently rocking side to side. She can also hear an intermittent, soft sort of rubbing sound that corresponds with the rocking. She was a seasoned trucker already at this point, but really wasn't sure what this was, and all the ideas that came to mind ranged from the mundane, but alarmingly unsavory, to the outright paranormal. Terrified, she creeps up to look in the side view mirror to see what's out there. Turns out some moose like to lick the road salt off semi-trucks. I hope that cow from the earlier story feels really validated by this factoid. Not a trucker, but I drive a lot of miles in a company truck from my oil field company. I'm on call 24/7, so I'm out at all hours. One night after a long day on a location in the Oklahoma Panhandle, which is rather remote and sparsely populated, I was driving back to the town where my shop is located. I got too sleepy to drive and decided to pull over and to nap until the sun came up. So I pulled off the 2-lane highway down a country road and parked on the other side of that road. It's safer than pulling off on the shoulder of the highway, and no headlights to bother you. This was and is common practice for me. I left my pickup running and turned the headlights off and leaned my seat back and fell asleep pretty quick with the AC on low and the radio turned off. I slept pretty good for maybe an hour, and then I guess I was having strange dreams, so I woke up, but just kept laying there because I was groggy. The wind was picking up and sort of shaking the truck with random strong gusts. Lots of wind in Oklahoma. Eventually, I started to imagine I was hearing whispering or murmurs, but I attributed it to the wind and my sleepy state, or maybe the radio still being on but low volume. I kept hearing it, so I sat up and turned the headlights back on to look around. The lights illuminated the dirt road to my side and in front of me. About 50 feet in front of my truck and extending down the road into the dark where my headlights faded out, were maybe 20 coyotes all milling around and sniffing around the gravel in the road. Their eyes were reflecting the lights. Coyotes usually run from light and avoid humans and their noise at all costs. There was no fear in these coyotes, and I was sort of struck by how many they were, all standing in the road. They eventually moved off into the dark as a group. I wasn't really afraid as I was inside my truck, but my feeling was an uneasy one, so I got back on the highway and went home. After reading through a majority of the comments on this thread, my curiosity was piqued, and I called my mum up to ask her if my great-grandfather, a trucker during the 60s, had ever told a creepy story of being on the road. To my surprise, she said there was one story he told her as a cautionary tale. It's not about parking overnight somewhere, but I thought it might fit in here just the same. He said he was driving through somewhere pretty rural, a small town with a few houses here and there. As he was making his way down the road, he saw a large cardboard box tumble down a hill and come to a stop pretty much directly in his path on the road. It was too late for him to brake, but why would he? It was just a cardboard box. It's not like it would hurt his truck if he ran over it, so he kept chugging forward. At nearly the last second, he said something came over him, and he immediately swerved to the right to avoid hitting the box. When he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw two little kids scramble out of the box and back up the hill. It's amazing what little kids in a small town will do for fun. I still feel sick to my stomach after hearing my mum tell that story. All the time. The worst might have been an incident that happened while back in Indiana. I was just parked for a 34-hour reset, means you can't drive for 34 hours so you can get a full 70 hours of driving back. It's the hours of service that allows us to drive and counts our hours, just outside of Chicago. Now, for all you non-truck drivers, right out of Chicago in Indiana is probably the first place you learn about not stopping if you can. Drug dealers, lot lizards, working girls, theft, the whole 9 yards. I didn't have a choice. I had nothing left at all for hours. So I sat. That night, I heard someone messing with my truck in the back. I sat in my truck while I heard this continue for 2 hours. I would much rather deal with it in the morning than go out to see what's going on and getting robbed at weapon point. Woke up the following morning to see my fifth wheel handle pulled. Means if I drove, I would have unintentionally dropped my trailer I had attached, and my glad hands, the lines that connect my truck to my trailer that provide me with braking capabilities, completely missing. Worst of all, they undid my frickin' catwalk like savages and ran away with it. My father-in-law is a trucker in Australia. He told me a story one night in the middle of the outback. Not a soul in sight and hundreds of kilometers between towns. Australia is huge, especially on the west coast where we are. Pitch black night, a tire blows out. He pulls out the shoulder and starts the task of changing. Feeling uneasy, he keeps looking over his shoulders. Something isn't right. Working fast, telling himself to stop being a scaredy cat. Then, all of a sudden, a hand lands on his shoulder. "Hey there, mate. You have a spare smoke?" An Aboriginal man was right next to him like it was a normal thing. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. He says, "Nah, mate, I don't smoke." So the man just walks away into the darkness. He reckons he aged about 20 years that night. Nothing too creepy, but I've parked in a few less than desirable places. The first was next to P&G in Kansas City on the edge of the ghetto. Nothing happened, but it was still freaky at the time because I was fairly new. Yes, I've had a couple of bums or lot lizards knock on my truck, but if you stay quiet, they just move on. I've heard random bumps in the night, but never really worried about it. I heard a story about a police officer in Chicago or New York making a trucker move his truck so that he didn't have to deal with a homicide in the morning. What is it about Chicago in particular here? Adding that onto my list of places to avoid for future travel. Let's get back to spooky. I was driving overnight in a very low-populated area. Due to circumstances, I was seriously sleep-deprived. Driving in a poorly lit stretch of woods, my headlights started to cast shadows through the rails on the side of the road and started playing on the trees on either side. It looked and felt like I was driving across an ocean. Then the hallucinations started. When you are seriously sleep-deprived, you'll start to see shadows flicking across the edges of your field of vision. Shadowy figures started appearing on the water next to the road, swimming alongside me. They looked like monstrous mermaids jumping in and out of the water. The Dutch roads are notorious for having very few truck stops that actually have space for a real truck. So I drove for another hour taunted by these figures. First truck stop I pull into and ready myself for a nap. I wake up a couple of hours later, and one of the figures was in the cab with me, looking at me. I freeze, terrified for my life. I couldn't move until I calmed down enough to start noticing that while it seems to be moving and breathing, it doesn't seem to move much. And then I realize it was my coat, slung across the seat. Panic subsided, and I used the adrenaline rush to drive the 2 more hours I had to go. Other time, less spooky but creepy enough, a truck stop I was parked at was infested with lot lizards. I had already seen some of the less lizardy types get into trucks. I was reading a book when suddenly I hear my handle of the passenger door being pulled. It was locked, luckily, but that didn't stop the unseen puller try to open it. It stops for a second, and I suddenly feel the cab swinging a bit, like someone was on the ladder. Up comes this horrible visage of rotting, missing teeth with a balding forehead and so much eyeliner it could be called face liner. She mimes giving me a particular adult activity, but I refuse. She jumps off, and I see her storming off, furious about something. Most of the other truckers were laughing at me. She was well known amongst the local truckers for her wiles. This is the scariest story here, not because of the hallucinations themselves, but because I learned I may be sharing the road with people who are operating 40-ton vehicles at 60 miles an hour while severely sleep-deprived. I used to drive trucks in northern Manitoba. There's a road in the northeast you can drive for several hours and see very few vehicles. This road is quite flat and straight in stretches. Of course, this is deep in the bush. One day I saw something cross the road in the distance. Very large, easily past the hood on my truck. But not long like a moose or elk, just tall. It disappeared into the bush, and as I drove by the spot, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard days later a tow truck driver describing on the radio his encounter with a similar creature. Only he was much more clear that he had spotted Bigfoot. This guy went to some length to explain he didn't want people thinking he was crazy, but he was sure what he saw. I asked an Aboriginal client of mine in a nearby community, and he said the elders spoke of them as commonly the same way they spoke of other animals. I don't know what I saw that day, but I'm certain it wasn't a bear, moose, deer, or elk. I just don't know what the hell it was.
Tattoo artist, who was your worst tattoo virgin? Had a customer that wanted a little watermelon slice on his thigh. Cool 5 to 10 minute nice and easy first tattoo. Nope, on the 3rd line I hear this weird little low-pitched moan. Look up and his head flipped back and the rest of him followed. When he woke up on the floor to 3 guys trying to pull him back up, he said something along the lines of, "What the freak, why are you guys touching me? That's gay." It's been 3 or 4 years since then and he still hasn't come back in to get it finished. If I didn't know better, I feel like that would be a comedy skit on YouTube. This old lady, maybe late 50s, early 60s, comes into our shop. She's quite timid as she approaches the front desk. I say hello and ask what we can do for her. We'll call her AB. "I've never had a tattoo before." "That's fine. It's not as scary as you think. What is it that you want done today?" "Well, my boyfriend is finally letting me have a tattoo." I had a shocked look on my face. "But I just wanted something small and out of the way. So if I change my mind, I don't have to look at it too often." "Okay, that's fair. What is it that you wanted?" "I want Andy's B written on my hoo-ha." Nope. We didn't do the tattoo. It was either some horribly controlling partner that wanted her branded with his name, or some BDSM kink that I didn't consent to be a part of. Screw that. I've heard horror stories about women getting branded with tattoos for illegal purposes. Scary stuff. Also, if I was the tattoo artist who was talking to this lady, I would have been like, "Hey, yo!" Girl comes in to get her ex-boyfriend's name tattooed as a tramp stamp. Comes in with friends and proceeds to scream throughout the process of doing the outline. And she leaves with half of an outline of her ex's name. Why would anyone ever tattoo their ex's name on themselves? Kid wanted to get a full sleeve as his first ever tattoo. I convinced him to get a smaller tattoo for his first ever. Now this sounds like an exaggeration, but he proceeded to throw up after 5 seconds. Dude, I made a similar mistake for my first tattoo. Got a half sleeve on my upper arm. After the line work was done, I had to take a break. Didn't puke though. The rest, a complex solid black design, had to be broken up into a few separate sessions because it hurt far more than I thought it would. Fortunately, my artist was a saint. I dated a tattoo artist for a couple of years and spent a good chunk of time at the shop. One time, a girl we knew from school came in for a large tattoo on her ribs. I think it was some flowers. Anyways, everything is set up, she's stenciling and laying on the chair just chatting and waiting. As soon as the needle hits her skin, she starts screaming bloody murder, moaning and begging him to stop. So he stops. shocked, and she tells him, in her normal voice, to ignore her and keep going. Screaming fit proceeds. Every so often he stops to check if she was alright, and she responds in a normal, cheerful tone that she's excited to see how the work turns out. Needle hits skin, back to screaming like she's being eaten by a pack of wolves. I watched a couple of people walk into the shop and turn around and walk right out. I'm surprised cops didn't show up. Anyways, I think he only got the outlines and some shading done before he couldn't deal with it anymore, and said something about scheduling another session because he had another client coming in. She never came back to get it finished. That's so weird. This type of story seems to be reoccurring in this thread. It's like people have split personalities when it comes to pain or something. That, or she just really liked the pain, if you know what I mean. A friend who never had a tattoo before wanted one on her ankle and was adamant about that. I told her several times that the ankle is a very not fun location, and I asked her if maybe she would prefer something on the shoulder instead. She insisted on the ankle. Okay then. The moment the needle touched her, she hollered. "You sure you want to keep going?" I asked. She said yes. That was the loudest appointment I've ever had, but to her credit, she made it through. Oh wow, reading this thread is bringing up so many repressed client memories. My worst one by far though was about 5 years ago when I was apprenticing in a college town. This girl came in with her boyfriend for a traditional butterfly above her elbow. I was super new, so it took me way longer than it should have. Maybe 2 hours? I lay her down on her stomach with her arm bent to her side. This is relevant later. Anyways, we start tattooing, and within 10 minutes, she started getting a string of text messages from her freshman friends, telling her they're essentially ousting her from their friend group, and they don't want her to contact them ever again. Super mean stuff. Obviously, she's upset, and she's relating all of this to her boyfriend. She starts crying and then full-on sobbing. I asked her if she wanted to stop, and she insisted on me continuing, and I just felt too awkward to counter her. She continued to sob on and off for probably another hour, while I just kept plugging away at this dumb little tattoo. At this point, she has cried so much that her tears have gathered where her arm was pressed against the massage table, and they had started to spill over into my lap. So I'm feeling uncomfortable as hell and now also damp. Then, as I'm within 30 minutes or so of finishing, she begins whimpering, then moaning, loudly. At one point, she tells the BF, "This is more intense than hooking up where the sun don't shine." And I wanted to die. As soon as I finished and checked her out, my coworkers, who had all been waiting for me to close, were like, "What the actual crap was going on? Why did you keep going?" But in that moment, all I could think of was to finish that tattoo as soon as possible. To her credit, she came back a year later and told me that she had been too embarrassed to come back, but that she loved the butterfly and wanted another tattoo from me. Her second session was pleasant and without incident. Dude, you deserve a medal for sitting through all of that. What a 180. So she was technically never a client, but I had a teenage girl, about 16 years old, come in once. She wanted a tattoo of a rose on the side of her neck. Now, I'm certainly not going to ever entertain a neck tattoo for a teenager, period, but she didn't even bother to bring in a parent with her to sign for her. So it went from a certain no to an absolutely never in a million years. She got pretty upset and made a scene in the front area, and I told her to leave. After a lot of arguing, she finally left, but not before making an idle threat. Other than sharing the story with my coworkers over drinks later and having a laugh at her audacity, I think no more of it. Until the following week when an incredibly angry middle-aged woman comes barging into the shop screaming how she's going to have us all shut down and sent to jail. Everybody in the shop was pretty confused, and after we got her to stop screaming at all of us, we finally got out of her why she was so angry. Apparently, her daughter went out and got a neck tattoo without her knowledge. It was around then that I recognized the girl from the week before peeking into the front window. It all clicked. She had found some sketchy artist in a kitchen to tattoo the rose on her neck that I said no to. I told the mother to call her daughter in, and her daughter pointed at me and told her mom that I was the one who did it. The tattoo was terribly done, to say the least, so the mom definitely had several reasons to be livid. She started getting upset again and yelling about how she was going to get me fired and sent to jail, etc. I let her yell until she calmed down enough to listen. Then I explained to her how the week before I told her daughter outright that I would not give her a neck tattoo. Her daughter screamed that I was a liar, and mom started up with another round of yelling, this time about how I was calling her daughter a liar. It was around this time that I just decided to point at our CCTV camera in the front area until the mother noticed what I was doing and stopped. I told her if she would like to, she could review the footage of me denying her daughter, the temper tantrum, and then her daughter leaving the shop. We usually keep footage for about a week or two and then we delete it, so I knew it should still be on the computer. Her daughter started looking pretty nervous around this time, but she didn't say anything. Meanwhile, I find the footage from that day, and the mom watches the entire interaction that I described go down. Then, with the coldest look of anger, betrayal, and disappointment, she turns to her daughter, she takes her outside of the shop quietly, and then screams at her outside for basically everything that just happened and how humiliating it had all been. After a bit, the daughter comes in and gives me a very sarcastic apology and then leaves. Now at this time, I was still willing to tattoo minors with parental consent, but I had been having a lot of crappy dealings with them and occasionally with their parents. I had been considering a no minor at all policy, but this experience solidified that in my mind. Aside from 1 or 2 exceptions, I haven't tattooed any minors for the last 13 years. I'm always surprised that you could or can get a tattoo underage with guardian consent. Stuff like that almost always feels like an outdated rule only put in place for child brides. Well, I got a piercing while I was underage, nose piercing when I was 17. I'm Indian American, so it's more traditional for us to have nose piercings at young ages. And also I convinced my mom to let me get one if I had a certain score on my ACT. It was surprisingly hard to do. The shop I went to refused to pierce me unless I brought my mom and my actual birth certificate. Like they wouldn't accept a passport or driver's license. I had to bring my actual birth certificate. It was wild. This girl's first tattoo, and she was my first paying customer. I tattooed people for free during my apprenticeship. She wanted a star outline on the side of her heel below her ankle. She was a bit nervous, so I allowed 2 of her friends to come in with us in the room. I started the tattoo and she immediately jerked away super hard. I warn her not to do that and try to relax. I continue and she jerks her foot again. The 2 lines I've done now look like crap, and I'm already pissed and freaking out inside. I got her 2 friends to hold down her foot and she continues to jerk around, and at one point kicks me right in the jaw. Needless to say, her tattoo looked like crap, and I was certainly crestfallen. I called my mentor after work crying that I had ruined my first tattoo on my client, and she kicked me in the face, which he said, "Wait, what? Nah, screw that. That's not your fault. I'll see you tomorrow at work." Been tattooing for 13 years now and I still love every minute of it. Got way crazier stories under my belt since that kick in the face. Whoa, you're not allowed to end with "I got way crazier stories under my belt, please share more." Fine, I'll share a few that aren't too long, but they still pack a punch. My first PP tattoo I ever did was on a man that you would never expect at first glance. Some background, studio at the time was small with a shared space among a few tattoo artists. Salon style. This person was a polite young white man who showed up looking like Mr. Rogers, sweater vest and all. He was scheduled to get his first tattoo, a name on the hip. Don't get names of lovers, people. I attempted to convince him that it's not a great idea, but he was adamant. Fine, whatever, I'll get set up. He comes back with his lady, and I ask him to show me exactly where he wants the tattoo. He shimmies his pants down so that the base of his peepee is showing and points there. Whoa! I again try to convince him not to do this, going as far to call him stupid and admitting I've never tattooed a peepee before. He is begging me to do it. Normally, I would flatly refuse wiener tattoos in general, but I did want to try at some point, and he was very polite and not pervy. I told him that I would have to charge him more, and he agreed. He lied down with his pants half off. I wrote the name like I was writing a check. Finished so quickly that my coworkers didn't even notice that I tattooed a wiener. Sometimes I wonder if they are still together. Probably not. During my apprenticeship, my mentor consulted with a woman who wanted to get the ruins of her 2 husbands. Yes, plural. This lady was some gnarly redneck who was polyamorous and into some sort of BDSM lifestyle. One husband was this goatee white dude, the other was a black postal worker. Strange trio, but whatever floats your boat. The first red flag during the consulting was the lady asking, would you mind if my husbands put cigarettes out on my body while you tattoo me? My mentor refused for sanitary reasons and also what the freak reasons. He made me stay in the room for the appointment so he wouldn't be alone with them. Come tattoo time, all 5 of us are in the room, and the second the needle starts, of course, she starts moaning. I'm cringing inside. My mentor asks her to be quiet and not to move so much. She keeps moaning and one of her husbands grabs her by the face and tells her to shut the freak up. The tattoo continues in painfully awkward silence. My mentor is no stranger to weird crap, but even he was freaked out. Last one. Early in my career, I submitted some work to a tattoo magazine since Instagram wasn't a thing yet. I sent them to a small part of the magazine where they share one photo per artist, but they called me and asked me if I was interested in doing an entire article. Jackpot! They interviewed me and asked for a photo of me as well as some of my work. I'm a female tattoo artist and this is relevant later. I submitted one photo of me tattooing wearing a t-shirt, not sexy, and it was quite modest. A few months later, the article comes out. Everything is cool until a couple of months after when I get a letter to the studio. Inside was a rambling letter about how they liked my work and wondering if I could offer some tips. It was from an inmate at the prison in another state. It dawned on me that prisons get tattoo magazines, and the article published my studio and address if someone wanted to get a tattoo from me. More creepy letters followed. One guy said that he was getting out in 4 months and wanted to take me out for a drink. The creepiest one came from a man whose entire face was covered in tattoos, rambled about how beautiful I was, and lamenting that he would never get out to meet me. Curious, I looked him up by his inmate number required on the envelope to see why he would never get out. Turns out, he murdered his girlfriend. Yeah, that's definitely not gonna get you a first date. My ex started screaming in pain. The needle wasn't even touching her yet. I was the tattoo virgin. Went in for my first piece, 5+ hours. Was obviously nervous and I'm not great with needles. But as soon as we started, I was like, oh, this is way easier than I built it up to be. I'm feeling the pain, but I knew I'd be able to commit. After about 20 minutes later, I started to feel really dizzy. My vision is going, so I sit up. My tattoo artist stops immediately, and she's talking to me, but I can barely hear her. The world is closing in, and it's only getting worse. I think she asked me if I need to go to the bathroom, but I know I'll make it a step or two before passing out if I stand up. I can't tell her this because my brain is not working and speech is not an option. Then I just start gagging. The artist is scrambling for something to help me, but she is not fast enough. I vomit into my mask, my hands all over my dress, into my hair and onto the floor. It's a mess. I'm a mess. I immediately feel better and go to the bathroom to clean up whilst the poor artist is wiping up the rest. I come back still stinking of vomit. I offer to take my dress off and literally sit there in my underwear while she finishes. She completes the tattoo like a champion. She sits with me in the vomit aura for another 5 hours. I am mortified and make sure I tip extra for the inconvenience, but the tat is stunning, so it was worth every minute. I'll bring a bucket next time just in case. Hey, no worries, I caught a girl who passed out getting a tiny wrist tattoo. Like, I physically caught her. I was in the shop with my sister. I had just finished my calves and was watching him tattoo my sister when I watched this girl wobble and caught her in my arms when she fell backwards off the stool. I literally thought to myself, wow, people really do pass out. All fun and games until I passed out while getting my thigh piece colored. It wasn't even the pain, just the heat, and I hadn't eaten. It was my 8th tattoo. I was so embarrassed, but apparently it happens all the time. I haven't thrown up yet, but I have to go finish that same piece, so it's a good chance that I might. But if I do, I'll come back here and emphasize it. I like to think I'm pretty good at handling pain, but I've never gotten a tattoo, so I don't think I'll ever be able to compare. Had a 19-year-old lad in the studio. He wanted Laura in large letters on his forearm. I took my time to quiz him. Turns out Laura was his sweetheart. I also spent a long time explaining that tattoos are for life and girlfriends come and go. He remained adamant and clearly explained that if I don't do it, he had a friend with a tattoo gun who would. So I did it, wrapped it up and explained aftercare. As he left, I checked the time. Great, 22 minutes to my next client. 22 minutes later, my client turned up on perfect time, followed less than a minute later by Mr. Loverboy. Apparently, he met Laura at the park who instantly dumped him for being so freaking stupid. It appears she didn't love him as much as he loved her. 22 minutes from tattoo to requesting a cover-up. I'll never understand name tattoos. I cringe when I think about planning my life together with somebody when I was 18 years old. I can only imagine cringing at the name of a former love interest tattooed on my body. One shop I worked at, we had a couple come in on the day we did $100 2-inch by 2-inch tattoos. They both were getting some small triceratops outline tattooed behind their ears. Nothing too crazy or detailed, so maybe about 15 minutes each in the chair at most. The guy was losing his mind. He's hyperventilating, laughing, jumping up and down, and yelling questions at us. Visually very nervous. He tells one of our apprentices that this is his first tattoo and keeps asking them how bad it hurts over and over again. The owner went into the back and grabbed a pneumonia packet, worried that this guy would pass out the second the needle touched skin. Turns out it was the couple's first date. He had told her that he was very impulsive, and she tried to call his bluff and suggest they get matching tattoos. To his credit, he got the tattoo and didn't pass out. Paid for both of them too. Bro, I hope they stayed together, because if not, that might be worse than a girl taking a date for a free dinner. Have 2. I did piercings, but my friend was an artist at the shop we worked at. Had a girl come in, no ink, no piercing. She wanted to get, no joke, daddy's girl as a tramp stamp. She was in tears moments into the tattoo, like hysterically. She suffered through altogether probably 25 minutes and walked out with girl right above her waistline. 10 out of 10, hilarious. The other was a guy. He had a few small tats on his arms, nothing crazy. He was also one of those, I watch the UFC and wear tap out, don't mess with me types. He wanted a pretty large tribal chest piece, collarbone to collarbone. He was told that we recommend a couple of sessions. Them tats hurt. And this is a lot of outline and a lot of shading. He insisted no, that he could sit through the pain. He ended up fainting towards the end of his outline. I worked there for roughly a year after, and he never came back to get it finished. I don't tap out, I just faint. Not a tattoo artist, but my friend tells this story that I had to share here. He just went to the pharmacy to get some prescriptions filled in North Carolina. They tell him it's going to take about an hour to fill and to come back later. So he walks out of the strip mall, and the next place over is a tattoo shop. He goes in and asks for a random tattoo. They tell him it's going to take 15 minutes to do the drawing and 30 minutes to tattoo it on him. He asks what they can do right now instantly, and they tell him that they can pierce his nipples. Within an hour, he gets both his nips pierced, a pretty sweet tattoo, and his prescription filled all in one regular Tuesday afternoon. Not the worst client, but just an unfortunate event. The apprentice at my shop, who had only been tattooing for a little under a year, was tattooing this girl's wrist recently. Her first tattoo, the word undefeated. Gets the tattoo, it goes smoothly. She likes it, she walks to the lobby, shows her dad, he likes it too. Walks back to get bandaged up, gets bandaged, they walk back to the counter. As he's explaining aftercare, she blacks out, falls back, hits her head on a giant painting hanging on the wall, an Ed Hardy original. The painting falls and glass breaks. He runs over, picks her up, and is checking the back of her head. He realizes a giant piece of glass has punctured her shoulder/trap. EMTs come, tell her she needs stitches, and they end up having to take her to the emergency room where she gets 6 stitches. The next week, the girl brought him a giant tub of cookies. She wasn't the worst, but it was an incredibly unfortunate experience for the both of them. His first time having someone pass out, and her first time being defeated. That last line killed me because I forgot that the tattoo said undefeated.
What is the best "karma is a B word" moment you have witnessed? I'm from San Diego, and during the summer you have to claim bonfire pits on the beach really early in the morning if you want it for that night. So my friends and I got to the beach at 8 a.m. and stayed there so we can get a bonfire going into the night. Just before sundown, this one couple asked if they could share the bonfire with us, and since our group wasn't too big, we decided to share it with them. However, that couple proceeded to bring a group of about 15 others, and they literally surrounded the pit and pushed us out. We were really annoyed, but we were so tired from being at the beach all day, so we decided to head out. Little did we know that that night had an extreme high tide warning, and when we moved all of our stuff over the wall that divided the beach walk with the beach, a huge wave came in and washed out that whole group surrounding our bonfire. The wave flipped over their table of food, took a handful of sandals back into the ocean, and destroyed all of their stuff. The best part was this one girl was trying to jump the wall to save herself, but she didn't jump high enough and ended up falling right back into the water. Karma is a B word. I was in daycare as a child. I had very long hair that my dad always put into a ponytail. There was a girl that would pull my ponytail all the time. We were doing a musical chairs thing at the end of the day while parents were picking us up. The girl was behind me and kept yanking my ponytail. I kept telling her to stop.
The teacher didn't see anything, so I can't do anything about it.
There were a bunch of parents waiting for us to finish our game, my mum included, and she kept doing it and the teacher didn't see it. So I turned around and punched her as hard as I could. She stumbled into the cubbies where we kept our coats. The teacher tried to chastise me and my mum was like, "Nope, didn't even see anything, didn't even get into trouble." I was running laps on a grass field in the military when I was about to lap a guy who'd always lap the crap out of me. So as I passed him, I yelled, "Gotcha, B-word," and immediately stepped in a hole in the ground and twisted my ankle. Despite the pain of jacking my ankle up, I thought the karmic payout was hilariously timed. That fool. YouTube fail videos have long since established that taunting your opponent seconds before the finish line basically guarantees some kind of karmic payback. My old manager was a monster, belittled people, made a hostile environment, denied everything that would make coworkers happy while giving herself every comfort, even denied me a half day to go to my mother's funeral, adding, "Would it be a big deal if you couldn't go?" He finally stepped on his own member after he wrote up a fictitious counseling statement about someone and the entire office revolted. The manager wasn't fired like we wanted, but he was relieved. So in comes the new manager. Very well regarded, 20-year Air Force veteran, retired at E9, humble guy who knew how to handle people. We have our first awkward team meeting, old manager bitterly in attendance. As the new manager is giving his "nice to meet you" speech, he sees the D-bag glancing around the table, trying to intimidate people. He stops talking, pauses for a few seconds, and then says, "You know, when I was in the Air Force, I learned that if you take care of your people, they'll take care of you." He then stared directly at the old manager and said, "If you don't take care of your people, they'll take care of you." Sitting on a state highway late at night because of a bad car accident. The highway was packed and barely moving. One guy thinks he's smarter than everyone else and tries to drive on the shoulder. He makes it a good little ways before running into an on-ramp, also packed with cars. He had nowhere to go and no one let him in. He was stuck between cars in the rightmost lanes and cars from the on-ramp. Everyone stuck bumper to bumper and flowed around him. I went from watching him pass me and almost getting out of my view to passing him and losing sight of him in my rear view mirror. My dad told me a story once from when he was younger. He was in traffic in a two-lane, two-way road. It was backed up in one direction, heading into an event of sorts, but there was sparse traffic going the other way. My father starts seeing this tool in his rear view who would pull out from the traffic into the oncoming lane, drive as far as he could before a car started to approach from the other direction, and then get someone to let him back in. After doing this a few times, he gets up to my father when he needs to get back in. My father doesn't budge, and the guy has to throw it in reverse and back all the way up to the end of the line. Of all the fantastic things my father's done in his life, and all the lessons he's taught me, if I've taken one thing away, it's that I will never let that guy in. I love highway justice. My husband and I like to call people like that the D-word of the mile, because there's always one. As much as all the other figures on this compendium deserve the karmic justice they were handed, these individuals who believe the rules of the road apply to literally everyone but themselves are particularly satisfying, aren't they? When I was a kid, we visited Montreal. I had gotten a hockey puck as a souvenir. While we were in our hotel, my sister decided to mess with me by hiding it. I got mad and yelled in my high-pitched voice, "Give me back my hockey puck!" before smacking her in the head with a pillow. Guess where she had hidden it? As a parent, I don't even think I could get mad for that. I was coming out of work from a nightclub in New York City in 1993. A friend and I were walking toward the train station when we heard an older lady screaming, "Help! Help!" We saw a guy running away from the screams toward us with a woman's purse in his hand. I don't know why I did this, but I pulled out my work ID badge. Plain work badge, not a security badge. I was just the DJ. The thief must have thought I was a cop, and he immediately throws his hands in the air, and without a struggle, he throws himself to the floor. I told him to stay laying on the floor or he will be pepper sprayed. I had no pepper spray. A few minutes later, the cops show up and arrest him. The old lady was very grateful and was mostly worried about her pictures of her family she had in her purse. Bad guy got instant karma and didn't even get halfway down the block with the purse. Driving to Chicago, and a crazy guy is road raging, swerving erratically while yelling about shooting us. He zooms off. 5 or so miles later, we see his van upside down in the ditch. He's standing on the shoulder talking to a cop. You should have pulled over and said, "Hey, about you threatening to shoot me back there. Sorry, but you were going so fast I couldn't keep up. But hey, you're welcome to give it a shot now." I got rear-ended in a turn lane by a girl texting. She was doing 45 miles per hour, and I was stopped. No major injuries. I went to her court date hoping she got a big fine or something. She got a $50 ticket. I was a little bit upset. As I was sitting at the stoplight to pull out of the court, I watched her run a red light and T-bone a cop. I don't normally laugh at other people's misfortunes, however, I laughed my butt off on that one. When I was driving my Jeep very carefully in a snowstorm and someone in a Mustang passed me in an unsafe manner, he almost lost control of his car, which would have caused an accident that included me. Picture someone dangerously fishtailing right in front of you with an 18-wheeler coming at you in the other lane. Saw him in the ditch 5 minutes later. Idiot. Seems like he started as he meant to go on. I suppose I really should have guessed how many of these were going to be car and road related. Here's a similar story with a dash more coincidence involved. This same thing happened to me in London with a sudden snow flurry. I was driving down a hill and my car was sliding towards parked cars, so I was taking it slow. The guy behind me was driving a Land Rover and tooting at me to hurry up. Ended up overtaking me at speed. Got home a few minutes later and the guy is sitting on my garden wall with a gash on his head. His car had crashed into the central bollards. I asked him if he wanted to come in and wait for the emergency services, but he was too embarrassed. Couldn't help myself and told him he was driving too fast. He said he thought Land Rovers were made to handle those conditions. I work in an ER, and once a girl got brought in by an ambulance after being assaulted. She was walking down the street when some guy tackled her to the ground and tried to drag her down an alley. A good Samaritan managed to chase him off and call the cops. Like 20 minutes later, they brought in a guy in full cardiac arrest. Turns out the police found the attacker and chased him several blocks to where he collapsed, and his heart gave out. He was dead on arrival and the victim ID'd him right in the ER. I was kicking a customer out for being racist and cursing at one of the employees. He yelled offensive stuff and then he tried to slam the door on his way out, but it had one of those things that make the door close slowly. He pushed it hard, but it didn't budge and he slipped and fell on the floor. We had a good laugh. The correct name for that thing is a door slowly closer.
A door slowerer?
Americans call boingy deceleratory hallway blockers door slowly closers. When my ex-husband who stole $4,000 from me to go visit his mistress in another country called me to beg for money. Actually, my credit card number, as if, because his lights got cut off. The other day, I was taking my dog for a walk around the neighborhood. She squatted down to take a poop, and I reached for my doggy bags only to realize I was fresh out. So I peeked around, making sure nobody was looking, and I just left it. 10 minutes later, I'm walking across the road, and I cut through a thin grass median in the center, and what do you know? I step in dog poop. I wasn't even mad. I knew I deserved it. When I was in my first grade, my class had recess, and this bully pushed me to the ground. I fell and was about to go off on the kid when this fourth grader came over, lifted the kid up, and took the kid over to the principal. Karma is the best. A very similar thing happened to me when I was in first grade, but there were a few key differences. The bully wasn't alone. There were 3 second graders, one of whom was the leader. I kicked his goons' butts before he took me on himself. They started it. I was on the monkey bars and they came up under me and started twisting my legs, so I fell. The guy who ended up saving me was in 3rd grade, not 4th. He didn't take the bully to the principal, just carried him a few feet away and dropped him. The guy who came to help me was my brother, which was interesting because he was usually the one giving me a hard time. It's the older brother Maxim. The only people that can beat up on my younger brother is me. I was at a party one time, and this one girl couldn't stop talking crap about this other girl that was coming to the party. The other girl shows up, and this dude picked her up and hugged her and spun her around in a way where her foot kicked the girl that was talking crap right in the face while she was sitting on the couch. Her beer spilled all over her, and she caught a black eye. Every script or so, there is one story in particular that causes the narrator to spit out his drink all over the screen, laugh outrageously in public, or have to stop for a solid 5 seconds while he wheezes with laughter. This was that story. Happened to me at work. Meth Head was trying to pay with like 1,000 coins for a $5 scratch-off. She tried to say she was only 10 cents short, ended up being over $1 short, then complained and said any decent person would have spotted her the money. Pretty much told her she could go down the street and try there if she'd like. She pulled out a 20 and bought 2. As she walked out the store, she said, "Karma is a B word." When she got to her car, a cop pulls up behind, blocking her in. They proceed to search the car, then arrest her and her boyfriend. It was hilarious. F her. So let me get this straight. She tried to buy a scratch-off using a bunch of coins, got mad when nobody gave her $1, and then pulled a 20? F that B-word. A classmate in school broke one of his legs and was using crutches. He was about to go down the stairs and another kid kicked one of his crutches down the stairs. I walked down there and got his crutch for him, and while walking back up, the kid who kicked the crutches came tumbling down and I moved out the way. The kid broke his arm.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, it sounded like someone fell down the stairs.
No, it was actually the sound of sweet, sexy karma returning the favor. Last Saturday, I was on a crowded NYC subway at 2 a.m. Two drunk dudes, young 20s, lighting a joint and walking around flaunting it. One literally came up to me, "You think a weedhead ain't gonna smoke a joint?" Whatever that means. The whole train kept ignoring them and they kept parading around being a bunch of morons. They spotted two taller, athletic-looking dudes and started making fun of them for looking like cops. It was the line, "Which of you is the sergeant?" that finally put the athletic guys over the edge. They looked at each other, smiled, reached into their pocket, and pulled out their badges. "Okay, boys, empty your pockets." The subway blew up in laughter. They would have gotten away with everything if they just didn't go bother the two plainclothes police officers. Score one for the good guys. And then I went home and smoked up a joint myself in my living room. I worked as a bartender at a bowling alley. For some reason, one of the other bartenders hated me. She was constantly poaching people on my side, horseshoe-shaped bar, so we each got a side. We split tips, and whenever it was her turn to count them down, I know she wasn't splitting them properly. Tried to get the scheduling manager to put her on my days, etc. One of my regulars even said she caught her pocketing tips and not putting them in our communal bucket while I was working with her. Well, tournament season started, which everyone dreaded/looked forward to. Dreaded because the shifts were twice or 3 times as long as normal, and there was a constant rush of people at the bar. Looked forward to because shifts were 2 or 3 times as long as normal, and there was a constant rush at the bar, so we'd make about as much in a day as we did in a week. Well, the first tournament was teams that she considered hers. They bowled on her side on days she worked, so she knew them well and was looking forward to their tournament tips. She came in, saw that I was scheduled to bartend that day, and flipped out. She started ranting to the manager, who happened to be the scheduling manager. The owner pretty much said I was one of the better bartenders, so I was getting put on the tournaments, and if she didn't like it, she could just leave. My co-worker left, and then I got to work her normal shifts as well. I was working in a pub in Liverpool and had just arrived about 10 a.m. to start my shift. I knocked on the door and waited for someone to let me in. I became aware of some voices shouting and turned around to see 2 guys, shirts off, swaggering towards me, talking in a language I didn't understand. They came right up to me and whatever little English they did speak came out. They called me a frickin' working girl and a frickin' B-word, etc. Nasty stuff, and I was really quite scared. I was knocking on the door really hard at this point, but after insulting me and laughing, they walked off towards a busy road. I watched as they walked out into the traffic, waving their arms at the cars to stop for them, then giving the drivers the finger. Suddenly, one of the cars stopped and 4 big guys got out. One of the nasty dudes ran off, but the big man got caught and shoved hard against the car a couple of times, clearly hurting his head and elbow. Then one of the guys made out that he was going to punch him, big time, drawing his fist far back. The little crap just covered his face and screamed. They didn't get hit, but the car guys and a lot of passers-by burst out laughing. They let him go and he ran away. That felt good. Nothing better than watching highway vigilante justice from the comfort of your own vehicle, huh? I hope at least some of the drivers had a packet of crisps to consume with the show. My dad kicked our dog because it was standing in front of the fridge and he wanted a beer. But as soon as he opened the fridge, the shelf that was holding the beer fell off and every single can busted open. Woman on a cell phone runs me off the road, flips me off for laying on the horn. She was going right and I was a ways back going left. A van was in front of her at the red light and she just plows into the back of it. I slowed down as I passed with the window down. Running me off the road wasn't enough to get your attention, huh? She flips out. I laugh and drive off into the sunset. You might have considered giving your contact information to the driver of the van. I was a witness, I saw her talking on her phone while driving, and saw her ram into your stopped vehicle, and will be happy to tell the same to your insurance company. My brother was making fun of an old man slowly shuffling across a parking lot. Look at Speedy Gonzales, or something, and 2 seconds after, he, my brother, bashes his foot on the cement parking barrier. He limped back to the car as I laughed hysterically. Every winter when my family and I would go skiing, if it was snowing on our drive up or back, there'd be an idiot soccer mum or dad driving a Suburban on worn-out all seasons, going 50 plus in the snowy lane, not the one people are driving in. It's always incredibly satisfying seeing them either pulled over or in the ditch. I made the mistake of pulling them out twice. Never again. They are never grateful and never admit they're an idiot for driving so fast. The last one, once I got them out and unhooked them, jumped in the Suburban and in order to make it move on the snow, floored it, achieving not much more than throwing snow behind them and making their already bad tires worse. I was working at a mental health facility for the elderly as a nurse, worked there for over a year with a perfect work record. I worked for the same company at another elderly facility, also for the same amount of time with a perfect work record. My coworker found out I have PTSD and decided to tell my boss at the psych facility that I have PTSD, and the two together plotted to have me committed. One day in October 2012, they launched their attack. I was working a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift and doing very well for 2 hours when my boss called me into her office to congratulate me on 1 year's service. When we were in her office alone, she started grilling me about my mental health and how it plays out at home. Next thing I know, she's forcing me to call my coworker, who is off duty, and making me go with her to the psych emergency because I have PTSD. The entire meeting was designed to stress me out and caused me to be triggered enough to behave poorly or crazy somehow to rationalize the next step, which was to cart me off to an emergency, and when they see me, they will instantly know I belong locked away in a padded room. They didn't, though. The hospital said I was fine, just stressed out about being forced to go to the hospital like a crazy person for no reason other than admitting I had PTSD. After the hospital let me go, my boss put me on extended medical leave without telling me and ignored all my calls for 2 weeks. Wrote letters lying about me to her bosses and the HR department. I filed a union grievance and a complaint with a third-party whistleblower company for my company's head office to hear about. My boss lied about me to everyone. She said I told her I had a murderer in my head, that I was standing in front of mirrors with knives wanting to cut flesh. They believed her, so they shut down my complaints. I took it to the Human Rights Tribunal, self-represented, against the largest long-term care provider in North America, and I fricking won. Took 3 long years from incidents to end of court. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. My employer's health declined considerably by the time the trial happened. She lost her job, she had to move to the mainland, and there is a forever public record about what she did. The coworker who helped my boss is in the permanent record, and the employees of the job site were ordered to learn what she and our boss had done to me and the outcome. She will never be comfortable at that job site again, and who and what she is known to all. I got the highest amount awarded for damages to dignity and self. I created a precedent for other PTSD persons with a clean work history who do a good job on the clock but have very real struggles with PTSD symptoms at home. No karma could possibly taste better than $40,000 and a clean reputation.
People who caught their significant others cheating on them without them catching on, how did you respond? She started by confessing that he kissed her while they were watching movies at his place. I voiced my assumptions that she should stop hanging out with him after that. But she got mad, defensive, and refused. When I look back, there's no question that that was the moment my marriage ended. But I loved her, so we did the dance for a few more weeks. She promised to stop talking to him, but started spending an awful lot of time going for drives. One night she fell asleep in her car, and another night she was at the airport having a Cinnabon at 3:30 a.m. The capstone came when she was out having dinner with her sister, while I stayed home with the baby. I opened up her laptop to order a pizza and found her browser pointed to real estate websites. Oh lovely, they're shopping for a house together. How quaint. Well, time to put a stop to this. I called her sister, hey, wife's phone must be dead. Can you hand her the phone? Pretty straightforward. And her response wasn't at all surprising. Huh? What do you mean? She's not here. Oh sorry, I must have mixed up my days. Have a good night. Click. So I called up my wife and made idle chat. How was dinner? How's your sister? How's your sister's boyfriend? Hope traffic wasn't too bad. I let her lie to me for a couple of minutes. When she asked what I was up to, I said, me? Oh, I'm packing your things. I called your sister and you're not there. It's time for you to come home. That was the second of 3 times I kicked her out before it finally stuck. I'm now happily divorced 7 years. She was at the airport having a Cinnabon at 3:30 a.m.? Literally the worst excuse I've ever heard. What the freak? Yeah, that's pretty bad, but I will at least give her some credit for trying. My ex would always just go with, my battery died, or I went to sleep early. Survey says that was a lie. This was my first marriage. Caught him by an obvious breadcrumb trail of late nights, plus long cell phone conversations seen on the bill. I responded by telling him I knew that I didn't want to hear any BS excuses and he was to end it immediately in one last phone call to her or we were done. 8 years of marriage at that point. I gave him 6 months and he still hadn't put her away, so I hit the lawyer and gymmed up. Honestly, I was a little relieved to have an excuse to leave him. Our daughter says he still talks about how much he regrets losing me. He's been remarried 5 years. What a jerk. Ouch. That's terrible that he is using your daughter like that. Divorce sucks for children. Parents making it worse like that drives me nuts. Don't talk bad about the other parent, and don't make the child part of your dating life. Seem like 2 easy rules for everyone to follow. I should note, obviously children should be involved in future long-term relationships. The people who introduce their kids to a series of short-term flings, ugh. After confirming my suspicions, I put his phone back in his bag, woke him up, asked him where he was last night, and he straight up told me the truth by saying, "With her." I told him to get up, get his crap, and get out. And so, he did. I'd been suspicious for months, but put it out of my head because the homewrecker was a supposed close friend of mine. Went right under my nose both before and after our wedding. She snuck off during my bachelorette party to hook up with him. Finally, I just read his text and it was all laid out right there like a crappy romance novel. Confronted him and he was pretty nasty to me, as if he had any right. But I wanted to keep my hands clean during this whole ordeal, so I kept it short and civilized. The only revenge is living well. The divorce was smooth after a whopping month of being married, and now I'm happier than I've ever been. You're a better woman than I. If I confronted someone for cheating on me with a good friend, going so far as to screw her at my bachelor party, and he had the nerve to be nasty about it, I'm not a violent person, but I can't see myself not hitting him or at least verbally abusing him. Thanks for the kind words. I know I had every right to be furious, but in the immediate aftermath, I took civility almost to a fault. I was so floored by the whole situation, not to mention what most people would think about such a quick divorce, that I wanted to be sure there would be absolutely nothing that came back to me and made me look bad. The anger I did feel at first was directed at her, because it's so much easier to blame the mistress, you know? I may have clawed her eyes out had I seen her after I found out, but after all was said and done, I went through the sadness and anger, and within a couple of months there were so many doors opening in my life that I couldn't help but be glad things turned out the way they did. And now it's been over a year and I look back and I'm glad I didn't pee in his floor vents or anything, because honestly, he simply doesn't matter anymore. I hate to say it, but I do usually take the high road in a lot of situations, but I will say, sometimes that low road does seem fun in the moment. I drove off, went to where they both worked since I had left my car there earlier that day. Saw them making out in her car. All I could do was stare for a few seconds and had to will myself just to leave. It was that moment that I knew I lost her for good. We hadn't talked since. It's been 3 months. While my girlfriend showered, she invited me to watch Netflix on her computer to keep myself occupied. Google Chrome displayed her frequently viewed pages when it opened up. One of those pages was a Craigslist personal ad. English was her second language, so it was pretty easy to find her ad when I got home that night. I replied. She wrote back and we texted back and forth with my burner phone. I suggested a rendezvous at an upscale bar. I got there 10 minutes early, showed the bartender a picture of my cheating girlfriend, then tipped them $20 and told them to bring her a pina colada when she arrived. Oh, and make sure you give her this too. I had bought an MP3 player and loaded it with Escape, the Pina Colada song. She broke up with me shortly thereafter and never alluded to my ruse. Oh man, I'm sorry about your crappy ex-girlfriend, but I read up the lyrics to that song a few weeks ago. This is perfect. That song is so effed up. It's basically about two people who have a bonding experience over simultaneously catching each other actively trying to cheat on one another. Yeah, that's a relationship that's gonna work out. I thought the same thing. I've listened to that song so much growing up, and I always thought the people in it were dumb. My wife asked me to walk her mom through some computer stuff and handed me her phone. Heard the text message alert hit before we hung up, and casually checked if I got off the phone with her mother. The message said, "So, you love me now?" It was from her boss. I went mentally numb. Didn't mention it right away and waited for her to fall asleep. Got her phone and tried to open it. To my surprise, there was a lock code. I woke her up and asked her for her lock code. Told her that my phone had died and I wanted to play a game that we were both playing. She immediately wakes up and starts in on how she knew I was going to do this. and starts telling me how paranoid I am. She nuts out on me and calls her mom to let her know that I'm a lunatic and accusing her of all kinds of things, which I hadn't done yet, but now I'm pretty sure I know what's up. I tell her to go ahead and prove that I'm crazy and put in her lock code and see who the lunatic really is, along with who's the cheater. She puts in the code and several more messages from her boss pop in. Turns out that she was cheating after all. There were signs, but I tricked myself into ignoring them earlier. I left that night and I've never thought about going back. My wife left a few months ago. In hindsight, I think she was having an online affair with an old boyfriend that decided to turn into a real relationship. I guess I didn't really do anything directly in response. She was gone by the time I admitted to myself what was going on. But recognizing what was going on helped me move on from, I'm a horrible husband who wrecked my marriage, to she was a horrible wife who walked away from a good marriage as soon as times got tough. And it's helping me feel not the slightest bit of guilt as I fight to protect myself during the divorce proceedings. I was always the wage earner, and at this point, if the divorce leaves her penniless and homeless, I don't give a crap. She made her bed. Truth be told, I put a lot more into that marriage than I ever got back from it, so good riddance. It's crazy how getting out of a relationship can make you reflect on things. I always thought I was a good boyfriend, but after a while I thought maybe I was a bad one. When I talk about some of the things I experienced in my past relationships, people always tell me that my ex was extremely toxic and that things she did were not normal in relationships. At first I had suspicions. I was out of town and I looked at our cell phone bill, which I never do, to see how many peak minutes we had left for the month. That's when I noticed that she was spending hours on the phone, but never when I was around. She told me that it was a former colleague of hers that had moved to California and was injured in a motorcycle accident. She was never apathetic towards anyone. She would have been better off telling me that she was kicking kittens or belittling children for sport. This went on for a couple of months until she started volunteering at work a lot more. She was a teacher, so it was pretty common for her to have after-school activities. Besides, I was in evening college classes, so it didn't really feel like anything had changed. I mostly felt for our dog, who would often bear the brunt of her not being around. Eventually, she started being really selective about where she kept her phone, even though I had never gone out of my way to check up on her. Curiosity got the best of me, and one morning while she was in the shower, I found her phone and saw the text messages that read, "I hate when you leave. I love you." I'll never forget the feeling I got while reading that. After this, she began getting more creative where she hid her phone. My personal favorite was under the seat of her car. Even knowing all this, I confronted her pretty much daily and was met with absolute silence. That was far more hurtful than knowing that she had cheated. The day after Christmas, she decided to drive out of state to visit her family, with the guy she was seeing, I later learned. She updated me on her travels about halfway through the drive. I called her to warn her that there was a major storm where she was driving, and to be careful. She didn't respond, and I didn't hear back from her for almost 3 days. That was brutal. I had honestly come to terms with the fact that I would be receiving a call that she had been in an accident. I had even called her family to ask if they had heard from her. She finally showed back up at home on New Year's Eve. By this point, there was nothing to salvage of our 10 years together. She kept telling me that she'd file for divorce to end the misery, but I think she actually thrived on the misery she and I felt. She yearned for me to react to her actions. She became more egregious about flaunting being with the guy, even going with him to places she knew my friends would be at. As my grandma always said, it's time to crap or get off the pot. So I filed for divorce and moved on. I made it a goal not to fight over division of assets or belongings, which irked her even more. In the ultimate show of her senselessness, she demanded to get the house and I happily complied. Then the housing market tanked and she was stuck with a mortgage on a house worth less than half of what she owed. After it was over, I learned that he was a janitor at her school. She got pregnant before my side of the bed was even cooled off, and he had cheated on his wife to be with my ex. I got my revenge by living well after it all ended. I graduated from college, then law school, met and married an amazing woman, and we have a son now. It was painful at the time, but in hindsight, she did me the biggest favor in the world. When I was reading this, I felt like this guy dated a girl I dated years ago. My ex also thrived on making me feel miserable. She would do the same thing of saying she was gonna do something and then not respond for the whole night or the next day. She flat out told me to my face that she liked making me upset for fun. I finally came to the realization that she was a horrible person when my grandfather passed away, and she was just so cold and had no empathy about the situation. After a year or more of suspicion and shady behavior, his ruse was blown when a friend of mine also knew the other woman. She was hearing both sides and deduced that we were talking to the same dude. Arranged for both of us to meet at her house. Explained our stories and figured out he was playing both of us. I ended up calling him and telling him I was standing there in the same room with X, Y, and Z. He hung up on me. It's been done ever since and caused a lot of heartache for the both of us. It took me a while to heal from that. I got home from work early, spouse in bed with 2 large women, our son sleeping close by. Locked eyes, saw the oh crap look, picked up my son and his bag, grabbed all the clothes on the floor and went to my mom's. I have no idea what they wore home, but nothing of mine was going to cover that tonnage. It's probably not the same scenario you were looking for, but my ex-girlfriend accidentally confessed to cheating me 3 years after she dumped me. I got all sorts of reasons why she wanted to end our multi-year relationship. She just left out that she was screwing someone else. By this time, the same guy was her fiance. So here's what I did. I sent her an email. The exchange went like this. Hey, is it okay if I email you here? Wow, hi, yes, this is good. Are you okay? Well, not really. Based on your Facebook post, can you explain how your anniversary with new guy is in January when you dumped me out of the blue on February 6th? Oh, that's not really our anniversary, but we're both so busy. I didn't start dating him until shortly after our relationship was over. He's not the reason why our relationship ended. I miss having you as a friend more than you'll ever know. I waited a few weeks, then forwarded the entire email exchange to her fiance. Let him figure out why that wasn't their real anniversary, why he wasn't the reason we broke up, and why she misses me as a friend more than I'll ever know. I bet it's more than he knew too. I did something like this once. Kinda. I was dating this girl and she started being really weird. I rushed into dating her after a long-term relationship. So I let a lot of things slide. I decided to message her friend to see if he knew what was going on with her. I told her this the next time we hung out and she freaked. Turns out, after we broke up, she revealed that she was hiding 2 kids from me. And that friend was the baby daddy. I sure know how to pick 'em. Late to the party, but I really want to share this. So my BF and I had been together for about 2 years. Great relationship, no problems. This was my first real relationship, so I was in heaven. I was at college out of town for about 2 months when I went home to visit. I was planning on going to my BF's house that evening. A friend offered to give me a ride there. On the way, she pulled into a parking lot and broke down crying. She had something awful to tell me. She was dating his neighbor/friend at the time and had overheard my BF saying that he was getting it on with this girl at work and how cool it was to get a blowy by a girl with a tongue ring. I was devastated, but hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Got to his place and he wasn't home yet. She went to her BF's house and clearly let them know I knew, as they all gathered on the front porch with drinks waiting for a showdown. I should say that this was before cell phones were common, so he had no way of being warned. He gets home, he runs to me and swings me around all lovey-dovey, very romantic style. I fern happiness. We sit on the porch a few minutes and I begin to give signs that I was ready to show him some affection. We head to the bedroom, things start heating up, I slowly undress him, taking my time, get on my knees, grab his little buddy, look up with my bedroom eyes and whisper in a devilish voice, "Should I get a tongue ring since that's what you really like?" The look of pure fear will forever be etched into my brain. I wish I could say I did something awesome as he was still in my hand at the time, but in reality it was just a massive explosive verbal fight after that. Of course, I was fully clothed, and he, anxiously, was undressed the entire time. Found the Plan B receipt, and moved the freak out while she sat on the couch threatening to end herself. Throwaway for obvious reasons. My boyfriend and I had been together for a couple of years before I found out. He was a lot more careful hiding it from me at first than he was later on. I knew before we were together that he had a couple of 3-ways with his best friend and his best friend's wife. What I didn't know was that after it got awkward, he and the wife had got together while his best friend was at work, and while I was at work when me and my boyfriend were still dating. I eventually found out one night while he was sleeping beside me because he left his Facebook logged in on my computer, and I didn't even notice it until a message from her popped up. It was a response to a message that he had sent her telling her how much he was in love with her, and how he had brought a pair of her underwear in his suitcase on a vacation he had just returned from with his parents. She was wondering when they could meet up again. I was completely destroyed. I ran to the bathroom and threw up and shook for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. I'm shaking now as I type this, remembering and having tears in my eyes. I couldn't get over the betrayal. This is someone I plan to spend the rest of my life with. We lived together and we were talking about getting married soon. I scrolled through some of the previous messages, and the two of them had been messaging each other a lot. I alluded to the messages the next day without letting on that I knew, and he denied everything. I let it stew. He left his Facebook logged in on my computer several times in the months following, and there weren't as many messages for the following few months. But then they started up again. It was absolutely devastating. Anytime I would confront him about it, which got more direct, his response was pure denial, and he would turn it around on me somehow, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Eventually, I couldn't take the deceit any longer, and I ended up leaving him. I felt like the situation was killing me. I was a wreck, and I was getting further and further into substances to numb myself from it, and my depression was getting exasperated by it. The whole situation killed my self-esteem for a very long time. I am still in love with him, and I always will be. I know how stupid that sounds, but sometimes you really can't help who you fall in love with. He actually didn't see anyone after we broke up, until he died almost a year later. I constantly think about how I wish things would have gone differently, and long for a life we were trying to build together. Damn, I was not expecting the boyfriend to die in that story. But part of me thinks that maybe the reason why the OP still longs for them is because maybe they thought they could change or fix the person if they tried harder. In reality, some people just suck and you can't change them. Even though it hurts, it's best that you moved on. I didn't really catch her cheating, but all the signs were there. Before she graduated college, she was hired at a doctor's office as an assistant and would work late hours. I kind of expected this because I knew the medical professions consume a lot of time. I started to notice that she would spend more and more time at work, which started to get suspicious. About 4 or 5 months into her being hired, I knew something was up. She would go to work at 6 a.m. and then not come home until midnight some nights, saying that I had to drop off medication at a patient's house, or I went to the 9:30 workout class, both of which didn't make any sense because I called her coworker and asked when the office closed, 7 p.m., and when the emergency staff started, 9 p.m., and if she was a part of that staff, which she was not. Secondly, I went to the same gym and the latest class they had was at 7:45 p.m. The second sign was how distant she had become in the relationship and how protective of her phone she got. Normally, she wouldn't mind showing me pictures or texts on her phone, but she increasingly became overprotective. She would also refuse to sleep in my bed. She was one of my roommates at the time. After we both graduated, I finally decided enough was enough and it was time to confront her. She denied it, of course, but at this point in the relationship, I didn't feel a connection with her anymore and our love was dead. The night before I broke up with her, my roommates, including her, and some of her friends, some of the dudes, all went out for drinks. Everyone got completely wasted and we were all a big mess. What I remember from that night is wondering where my ex-GF went and where one of her guy friends went. Well, as it turns out, she was feeling sick and had to leave the bar. Thankfully, her guy friend was there to take care of her. When everyone decided to leave, one of my more sober friends got everyone together, but couldn't find my ex-GF and said guy friend. We started a search party and eventually found them with her head in his lap. Now, I barely remember this, but my friend said she wasn't going to town on this guy, but resting her head on his lap. He could have been telling me the truth or just trying to avoid a fight from breaking out. Regardless, I broke up with her the next day. The head on the lap thing seems probable, but all the other things the OP lists were definitely grounds for the breakup in my opinion. Went home instead of work, gathered all the clothes I really liked, my consoles, and anything I could think of that wouldn't be missed. When she went to work that night, I grabbed all the things that would be missed, including myself, and left.
What are some double standards that don't involve gender? When I was a little kid, if I left my toys out and one of my parents stepped on one, I got yelled at for leaving my toys all over the place. But if my parents left their tools out and I stepped on one, I got yelled at for not watching where I was stepping. I always find it amusing that when I purchase chemicals for my company, I can order some real crazy stuff, or stuff that can be used to do/make or synthesize crazy stuff, without raising an eyebrow or having to submit documentation or business records, because, hey, we've got an account, so it must be legit. But when I order good old 99.9% pure ethanol, which is really cheap for us because it's tax exempt since we're using it for industrial purposes rather than drinking it for entertainment, there's a mountain of additional paperwork attesting to the above. When I went to Japan, I was heckled by my friends if I went and had American food. Yet, when the same group of friends went out to Japanese guests here in the States, we always only went out to Japanese food. WTF? Seriously, I got American food when I lived in Thailand about once or twice a month, which is nothing compared to the 30-plus days in a month and 3 meals a day, but I would just be judged by the locals and even some foreigners for stepping into a McD for a hash brown and sausage and egg McMuffin. Like, leave me alone, fam. I'm homesick and I don't want to sweat from the burning spice of last night's leftover curry at 8 a.m. when it's already 33 degrees, 91 in freedom units, outside. When I have a lot of experience at a job application, like they asked for, but the employer thinks I'm too old for the job. My parents say that our generation only does stuff so that we can take a picture and post it, and then whenever we go to do something, my parents take a ton of pictures so they can post them. My mother rants and raves about technology a crap ton. She's the epitome of the good old days, yet 90% of her time is Facebooking on her phone. My parents are the same way. They used to be big sticklers for little to no technology, didn't have a gaming system until late middle school, didn't have internet until high school, didn't get my first smartphone until college. But now, my parents are the ones with the most tech, and my dad makes at least 1 to 2 posts to Facebook a day. My brother and I, both in our 20s, have to pry my dad away from his iPad to join us for our family's meals or watch a movie together. My boyfriend's graduation ceremony was this past Saturday, and my dad was responding to emails and Facebook posts throughout the event. It's quite funny when we call him out on it too, because he says, "I'm just answering some emails," or responding to Facebook posts. So he's entirely self-aware that he's doing it, but in his mind, it's justified. I've always found my parents' tech habits more funny and cute than anything. I can see these people's points though. At least growing up, my parents' technophobia got me out of the house a bit more than I might have got otherwise. Employers who expect you to stay late for hours of overtime on their whim, but get mad if you're even 5 minutes late in the morning. If I'm flexible for them, I think it's fair to be flexible for me. Such a nitpicky thing to destroy morale when it's already so bad from being forced to work late. Luckily, that was my old job, and I'm in a better place now. Bad parenting on their kid versus other people's kids.
But my kid is special.
Oh yes, I'm a twin with incredible parents. My middle school bully was a twin with terrible parents. They were twin sisters and would fight constantly in class. Like embarrassing screaming matches. My twin brother and I always got along, mostly due to his kindness and compassion through my moody and volatile adolescence. I was straight up B-word to him most of the time. However, we obviously fought sometimes. Once we were having a small argument in the hallway. I was accusing him of taking my silly bands to give to his little girlfriend, or some middle school drama thing, and my bully's mother, who was the superintendent of my school, called my parents and told them my brother and I were fighting at school and needed to be controlled. She didn't even approach us first. She could have definitely broken up our little argument by just talking to us. We weren't screaming or even talking very loud. I was just very clearly mad at him. I don't know if she saw the argument herself or if one of her daughters told her we were fighting or something. Meanwhile, her kids interrupted half of class every day and they didn't even get sent to the office. Cities and states telling us to conserve water by watering less. Some people comply and they end up getting fined by their city for having a dead or dying lawn. City and state buildings have the greenest lawns around because they water around the clock. Early morning, high noon, and the evening. Half the sprinklers are usually overspraying in the middle of the road. How about cities and states telling citizens to conserve water, then selling the water rights to major corporations or factory farms for almost nothing? I'll cut down my showers when you stop selling the state's water to gosh darn Nestle. Celebrity overdoses. Oh, such a tragedy. Addiction is a disease. When anybody else overdoses, ugh, gosh darn junkie, what did they expect to happen? Poor and weird equals weirdo. Rich and weird equals eccentric. Also, rich people don't commit crimes, they make mistakes. Unless the controversy becomes so large that it's threatening the reputation of other rich people. Then some of the offenders will be publicly ostracized and will be told that they fixed systematic issues. Bonus points if they make a heartfelt public apology on some talk show and restart their career. Celebrity worship overall just makes me angry. Yeah, when you think about it, there's a lot of people locked away who just sort of had the misfortune to not be rich and famous at the time. Tall people get more opportunities, get promoted easier, and generally make more than average or short people. Tall and pretty? Oh yeah.
What about pretty ugly?
Definitely true. However, the research on looks and strangers' opinions of you is strong. In fact, I don't even recommend Googling it because it can be depressing to see how something like appearance influences so many people's opinions of individuals they know nothing about, from which politicians people vote for to who gets hired for executive positions. Different side of the same coin, I can resonate with this so much. Not on a personal level so much, but I have had quite a number of conversations with co-workers who expressed their dislike of another fairly new co-worker. Their reasoning varied, but generally it was, "He just thinks he is so good or better than us." The guy in question was good-looking, young, but more importantly, was into bodybuilding, so he took care of himself and only ate his specified meals. The amount of middle-aged women that said they didn't like him just because they thought he was up himself was amazing. If I'm on my phone, people will almost always leave me alone. If I'm reading, they want to ask me what I'm reading and interrupt me, even though they can see the cover of the book. Which, if I wanted to talk, would I be reading? When I was a kid, I used to be allowed to read a book while around family at family gatherings. But when I got a Game Boy and played with that, I was told off for being unsociable. Except, I'm very dyslexic, and when I read, I am completely unable to hear anything, even someone calling my name. I could play on my Game Boy and hold a conversation at the same time. Adults will always whine about children enjoying the latest technology. I'm generally expected to give 2 weeks' notice if I'm going to be quitting a job. However, if said job wants to get rid of me, they can do it with absolutely no notice, and often with a bullcrap reason. That one depends on the country. In Canada, unless there is just cause, with extensive proof of written warnings, attempts at retraining or proof of a serious incident, the company is legally required to pay a period of notice depending on how long you've been there or your skill level, or allow them to continue working for that long. It's always amazing to me that even the US doesn't have laws like this in place to protect employees. Respect is earned. I deserve respect. Depends on what you mean by respect. I should treat you like another worthy human being? Okay. I should treat you like some sort of authority? F no. Rabbits and any other pet. I had a black mini, Rex, and she was the most intelligent rabbit I've ever had. She was litter-trained, did tricks like standing up, kisses, and came when you called her name only as long as she felt like it. But whenever I'd talk to her about people like they talk about their dog or cat, people look at me like I'm mad. People always ask each other about how their dog or cat is, but start talking about a rabbit and they lose complete interest. When I told them how much I spent on the vets a few times she's been ill, I've had some people say, "Why don't you just get a new one?" Because it's a living thing. Another rabbit we got from a pet store turned out she had some problems, and the manager of the store said, "Why don't you return her and swap her for another one?" How about get lost? She's a living creature that didn't ask to be here. Some people need to understand that there are a lot more to rabbits than meets the eye. Being bilingual, specifically speaking English and another language. In most of the world, I'm considered intelligent and sophisticated if I speak more than one language, even if I speak with an accent. In the States, speaking a second language, especially if I have an accent, gets me disrespected as a stubborn, non-acclimated immigrant. Oof, I feel this one. There's nothing more frustrating than having people speak to you as if you're a child, even though you're an educated, well-read person with a speaking handicap in the current situation. Narrator rant over. If I finish a 9 to 5 and want a glass of wine after work to relax, that's perfectly normal. If I'm working a night shift and want a glass of wine after work to relax, I must have a drinking problem because it's 8 a.m. and I'm opening a bottle of rosé. You're supposed to drink Bloody Mary before 10 a.m. Once the clock has 4 numbers on it, all bets are off. The need to respect your elders even when they abuse that privilege and treat young people disrespectfully. If you want respect, you need to show respect. Sometimes people use respect to mean treating someone like a person, and sometimes they use respect to mean treating someone like an authority. And sometimes people who are used to being treated like an authority say, "If you won't respect me, I won't respect you." And they mean, "If you won't treat me like an authority, I won't treat you like a person." And they think they're being fair, but they aren't. And it's not okay. Pretty good quote. Old enough to join the military and go to war, but not old enough to buy a beer. Laughs in German. Professors will have very strict due dates on students, but will wait until the last week of the semester to finally give back our grades from our first presentation. Or they waste half a frickin' hour trying to figure out how to use the projector. If I have trouble with my laptop or submitting an essay, it's TS. The federal government putting green herb at the same level as crystal, white powder, and smack. Meanwhile, alcohol and tobacco are available in stores everywhere. What's worse is that actually, according to the drug scheduling system, Mary J is set at a higher class than white powder and crystal. Schedule 1 is supposed to be reserved for substances that can cause harm and have no medical usage. White powder is on Schedule 2 because it has a medical use, namely as an anesthetic, and it can help stop bleeding. Crystal is also a Schedule 2 because forms of amphetamine are used in ADHD medication. I don't agree with green herb being Schedule 1 for many reasons, but especially because it doesn't even meet the criteria for it. It's a catch-22. Weed is S1 because it has no medical uses. It has no medical uses because those medical uses can't be researched. It can't be researched because it's S1. Same goes for harm. A lot of this has been changing recently, though. At my old job, there was this lady in her 50s who would say whatever was on her mind, even making fun of the managers or policies during meetings for everyone to hear. Yet I, female 22, say one sassy thing and I need to learn to watch my mouth. Yep, seems fair. This was just a generic retail job, and this lady had only worked there for like 5 years versus the 3 years I'd worked there. So I definitely think it was solely her age that let her get away with it. Oldest children never get away with anything, but they see their younger siblings not getting punished for the same things they would have been excoriated for.
I'm the youngest of 3, with a massive age gap between me and my 2 siblings. Yet, when my sister was a grade A C-word to me, daily, she's a frickin' psycho, guess who got punished and guess who got absolutely no consequences whatsoever? I'll give you a clue. It wasn't her getting told off. I think we forget it can just as easily go the other way.
I feel like the debate on whether older or younger siblings have it tougher is as old as time itself and will go on forever. I know me and my siblings are still having it into our adult years. If a dog doesn't like someone, that person's character is questioned immediately. But if a cat doesn't like someone, the cat's just a butthole. Have had dogs and cats, love them both, so not looking to start a cats versus dogs argument. The thing that bothers me about the whole dogs are good judges of character bit is that I've seen movie footage of the Führer of the Third Reich petting dogs and the dogs liked him just fine. I think dogs have an entirely different value system than humans. A dog might like you or hate you because of something it smells that humans can't detect. I've had some dogs charge at me in attack mode and others walk up to me and beg to be petted. They don't sense innate goodness or badness in people. They just have their own likes and dislikes that have nothing to do with human values. To add to this, I also believe a large bit of a dog's behavior is what it picks up from its owner. For example, the only person my dog has ever been unfriendly to was someone who I had a strong disdain for. Yeah, I'm shifty as heck and dogs love me. Managers berating you for doing a bad job when they have absolutely no idea how to do your job. Should have clarified that I meant more when a manager who has no idea how to do your job picks apart the work you've done, looking for flaws, criticizing your process when there's otherwise nothing wrong with it. When you burn a body in a crematorium, you're doing a good job. But if you burn a body at your house, you're destroying evidence. Same thing as when Miley Cyrus is in the nude and licking a hammer. It's art. But when I do it, I'm drunk and need to leave the hardware store. If the government owes you money, it can send you your refund any gosh darn time it wants to. If you owe the government money, you can bet there will be interest and penalties added.
Actually, if the IRS holds on to your money too long, they will pay you interest. And then the IRS will charge you tax on that interest.
Work smart, not hard, only applies to people who aren't usually smart. People with a good record are assumed or expected to do a better job than their peers with the not-so-great levels of achievement. This would be okay, except for the fact that the person with a good record could be punished for producing the same quality of work as the other person, simply because they're capable of more. I'm all for personal growth and doing your best, but sometimes the job simply doesn't require the extra effort. It's ridiculous to ask me to go above and beyond when I could save my energy for something that actually takes more work and deserves more time. It's okay for old people to be bigoted and close-minded because they grew up in a different time, whereas young people are just considered ignorant a-holes. Which is why I refuse to acknowledge he's just set in his ways as an excuse. No, he's just stubborn and refusing to change. Now, if they have a legitimate memory problem like Alzheimer's or dementia and aren't in their right mind, that's different. They actually cannot help that. As there often are in these chat rooms, there was a recurring theme in this one, that one being generational differences and entitlement. I have filtered it down to a much smaller representation for the sake of variety. Having kids versus not having kids. A good friend and co-student and I are in very similar situations. We both started studying medicine after 8 years of working in the same hospital. He's married, I live with my girlfriend, we both have to take the train for about an hour, 45 minutes for me, 1 hour for him, to get to our university. We both had a lot of problems in our first year, especially with chemistry and biology. I recently asked to have one subject shoved into a later year, so I have more time to study anatomy and other important subjects and refresh my knowledge of chemistry to then be ready for biochemistry, a subject most med students struggle with. I was able to change my entire curriculum the way I wanted, granted, having to study 1 or 2 semesters longer, because I have a 3-year-old kid. They told him that his situation is not severe enough to grant him to study longer than usual, even though it could easily mean he won't be able to fulfill his dream. Charities for kids get funding. Clean water for kids, clothes for kids, food for kids, AirPods for kids, but try to get funding for adults. Kids are seen as innocent, but adults just need to stop being lazy and get a job. Adults sometimes get stuck in impossible situations through no fault of their own. Having a job isn't a guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen to you. We'd have less kids in need if we helped the adults in their families and communities. The other one is substance addicts. Everyone says they should get clean, and they should, but people treat addicts in recovery as bad or worse. No one wants treatment clinics in their neighborhood. It's hard to get a job already, and if you have to go to the clinic every day, people find out that you are in recovery, getting off substances, and they don't want to talk to you. I work with people in recovery, and there's so many hoops to jump through just to get and keep treatment services. I think anyone who wants to get clean deserves support and respect. It's a very tough road. It's fine to say you're trying for a baby, but it's not okay to tell people you cream pie your wife on a daily basis. In my freshman ELA class, our teacher put my best friend and me next to each other. This was a teacher who was very monotone, was never interesting to go to her class. I was trying to be a good student, but one day she yelled at me for a reason so stupid I can't recall. This teacher also really liked my friend. So we decided to see how double-standard she was. She had a strict policy of not putting your head down in class, which is damn near impossible to do. She would randomly tell us to read from our library books when she didn't feel like teaching. With this knowledge, me and my friends decided to put her to the test. Recall, we are right next to each other. We both, in the exact same way, put our heads down on our arms. She walked around the opposite side of the classroom, thinking we wouldn't see. She finally showed up behind us. That's when she tapped on my desk, stood in awkward eye contact and silence, and said, "Keep your head up and read," very sternly. After this, she walked away. Within a second or two, my friend and I just died of laughter as she turned around and yelled at us for talking during reading time. This isn't the only time we have done this. Streaking. At what age is it no longer okay to be bare naked or only wearing underwear in public? 1-year-old? 2? Or 3? 17? 85? Not to mention bare naked baby photos. I think the general rule is, if you need someone else's help to wipe your butt, you get a pass. Being old enough to have a job and pay tax, but not being old enough to vote and have a say in where your tax dollars go.
What's a telltale sign that someone is a selfish person? When conversations don't feel like conversations, they are one-sided talks about what they want, their thoughts, their life, their priorities, etc. When you are able to actually slip in a word, your words are used as transitions in their dialogue. No matter how you format your words, they all just add to the plot of that person's story. What you say and what you do are pawns in their game to be manipulated in a way that belittles your experiences, your actions, your opinions, and your choices. Something I personally want to add to this is most selfish people can't have conversations. I've noticed this with the girl I used to fool around with. She would try to make conversation by making it about me with, "What are you doing? How was your day?" But no matter what I responded with, it always got a 1 to 2 word answer. "That's cool. Interesting." That way they give you the illusion that they care, when in reality they just use you when they need you. They gladly take any favors you do for them, and when asked if you could reciprocate once, they get defensive or aggressive, and act like you're the selfish one for daring to expect something in return. It doesn't make you a bad person to expect reciprocation in a relationship with someone else, romantic or platonic. Relationships are give and take, and it makes them healthy. It's not entitlement to expect kindness if you give kindness. If you're the only one giving, you're being taken advantage of. And for clarification, for anyone who thinks doing something kind with the expectation to gain something from it can be manipulative, I'm not talking about narcissism and manipulation. I'm talking about the natural give and take in a relationship. It's not manipulative to expect certain things out of a relationship. Depending on the kind of relationship that is. The whole reason we make relationships is because they give us something, whether that be support, love, safety, or other advantages. It isn't a bad thing, it's a human thing. Typically with give and take, if you notice a pattern of one person consistently taking without giving, the one taking is the problem, not the one giving. The kind of people who use this as a manipulation tactic aren't the ones who stick around in a relationship for years, doing favors and kind things without being asked to. They're more than likely to do one favor and demand twice as much in return. Why do I know this? I've had these people in my life, which is what gives me the realization I'm commenting here. Yeah, I'm actually going through this with my roommate. She always asks for my help, expects me to walk her dog every day, constantly asks me to pay rent in advance even though I'm not getting any income for 3 weeks. Yes, she asked me to pay a second rent just a week after the last. She never thanks me for walking the dog. Any advance payment? No thanks there either. She'll just keep asking as if I'm her bank account and then get angry when I'm unable to pay. Last week she asked me to cook extra food because we had guests coming over and she threw a fit because I used beans. It's not that she or anyone else can't eat beans, it was just her dislike of the day. She had eaten those same beans and other dishes and liked it. I had put so much effort into cooking more food than normal and her behavior was worse than usual. I have completely stopped helping her or even speaking with her. That sounds like my ex-wife so much. Did plenty for her. Would do anything she wanted to do even if I wasn't thrilled about it. But when it came to something that I wanted, she never seemed to have time for it. I eventually got to the point where I wouldn't even try to mention anything I wanted or liked. I put plenty of thought into gifts for her, but if I ever got something, it had no thought put into it. Basically got to the point where I felt selfish for even wanting anything. Took me a while to accept that I wasn't the problem or the selfish one. Eventually, I realized through help from a therapist that it was straight mental abuse. Relationships take compromise. When anything that happens to them is the worst thing in the world, and whatever happens to you is not that bad and a waste of time to talk about or even deal with. I know your mom died a month ago, but my best friend of 3 years died too, so I don't see why you're so sad all the time. I think narcissism and selfishness go hand in hand, so there you go. A friend of mine was talking to a mutual ex-friend about how she was feeling crappy because it was coming up on the anniversary of her sister's murder. The ex-friend responded that she was also feeling crappy and needed support because her boyfriend, who had been visiting for the weekend, had gone home. We both cut her off after that. After my sister's husband passed, a friend said, "I know exactly how that feels. My husband is in the army and goes away for months. But said husband comes home, can email, video call, and most of all, is not dead." She's now an ex-friend to everyone. I'll admit, I've caught myself doing the I know how it feels thing with friends before, but it's usually because I've been through the same thing. However, I've never tried to pass off a death of someone being on the same level as missing a partner that went home. That's just dumb. They feel no remorse for how they've hurt others. They don't think that they're wrong in the slightest bit. They can't shoulder any bit of responsibility. Look, it's not my fault that you can't do anything right. Very well then, I'm sorry you don't understand my point of view. You can't forget the classic, "You just misunderstood what I said. I didn't mean it like that." My former neighbors were bad alcoholics. Every night is a Friday night and weekends are like the new year. The police were constantly getting called to their house. Their kids not only destroyed their property, but other people's as well. Their junk was always thrown all over multiple yards. Their landlord ended up evicting them. My neighbor was pissed and fought hard in court to stay because they paid their rent via assistance. It was everyone else's fault but theirs. It was the landlord's fault for being biased against them. It was the neighbor's fault for complaining about their kids. It was their parents' fault for not helping more. Everyone was to blame, but not them. All I can say is it's been peaceful since they've been gone. They don't remember the times people have helped them, but remember clearly all the times that they helped others. It's easier to remember when you can count the number of times on your fingers. They bring nothing to the potluck, but are the first in line. Dude, screw these people the most. If you don't bring anything to the potluck, you better at least be cleaning up after the party. They respond how worse their situation is when you're sharing problems with them. They don't try to help or listen, they just draw attention to their side. Ah, the complainers. I have a friend like that, and lately I've just been letting her talk, with dry responses such as, "Oh wow, tough luck. Yeah, you've told me all of that via text." And I would talk only if she asked me a question. Well, the hangout got silent super fast. And it seems she is no longer satisfied sharing the details of her life with me. Noise. I once had a friend who would just complain all the time about everything, never really doing anything to fix the problems, and if she did, she'd still complain about it. One day I tell her that I want to be her friend, but our conversations were always so negative, and couldn't we just talk about some more positive things? The whole dynamic of the friendship changed, and she straight up just stopped talking to me, saying, "I don't know what to talk to you about anymore." That admission, tied with her inaction, blew me away. We drifted apart and are no longer friends. I've actually done this with friends before as well. I've often been told that I give the comfortable vibe, where people can just talk to me about anything, which is nice, but I also have a problem solver brain, so when I have friends that complain about the same thing all the time and don't try to improve after my advice, I just lose interest in those conversations because they're meaningless at that point. Like, I understand venting, but if the bad smell doesn't leave the place after a while, something might be rotten. If you are in a group and there's that one person that is constantly interrupting the middle of what you or anyone else is saying, generally to brag about themselves with a one-upper story, that's a precursor to stop associating with them. I've met too many of those people in my day, and they are more often than not happy to throw you under the bus whenever the opportunity arises. If they always talk about themselves, I know many people that will not shut up about their day for an entire call, then just leave you when you start talking about yours. Likewise, but some people just aren't aware that they're doing that. I've politely mentioned that to a couple close friends, and they've been way more aware about their behavior since. Life isn't binary, and good people might have bad habits without knowing it. So trying to help them is my way of thinking. By the way, your mileage may vary, of course, hence me saying some people. I think it depends on the situation. I have a lot of friends that I keep in touch with via voice text messages or video text messages. Since these aren't real conversations because we respond when we can, both parties usually end up speaking about their days after quickly responding to any questions. They have that superpower that leads everything back to themselves, even when you're actually talking about your own life or a specific problem of yours. They somehow make it that you start talking about them instead, without even changing the topic. Nearly everyone does this to a point. There's an extremely fine line between trying to comfort someone by saying something like, "I recently went through something with my father as well. I'm so sorry," and making their issues about yourself. It's crazy how common it is. And I guess if you are sharing something tragic to a group of people, at least one will try to make it into a competition and one-up you. I'm so nervous sometimes that people think I come off as the above comment, when I just want to say that I relate to you, not that it's about me. Sometimes just saying, "Hey, that sucks, I'm sorry," seems disingenuous. So saying, "Hey, I've been there and I know how much it sucks," sounds more genuine, I think. Conversations can be weird. They refuse to take responsibility for their actions. Similarly, someone who never apologizes. It takes a little longer to figure this out, but if after a few dozen hours of interactions, you've never heard "I'm sorry," you probably never will. I waited 4.5 years once. Never again. This is one of the main things I look out for when I might be interested in someone. I pay very close attention to how they act when they make mistakes or do something that has accountability attached. If they sidestep it every time, I know to cut them off at the knees. Complaining at work to coworkers doing your work for you while you complain. When they want to dig up your dead dog to use the skull for taxidermy purposes and is insistent on doing it despite your objections. They never admit when they're wrong, even if there is physical evidence. "Well, I'm sorry that you have a problem with me. Maybe you should stop being so sensitive. Why are you making that face? I literally just apologized to you." I wonder if this is everything it appears to be because I work with the dude who has a medium autism, so we look after him and he doesn't work. He's definitely not selfish. He'll go out of his way to help people who are more vulnerable than him and always puts them at ease and gets them to open up, interact, and basically have fun and feel safe. But you can't get him to stop talking about himself or his interests. It's all football, running, oh, have I told you about running and football? Harry Potter and that time 9 years ago when I accidentally farted? If you didn't know he was autistic, and it's actually not as apparent as you might expect, you probably would wonder why you can't get a word in edgewise. From an autistic perspective, that's probably the biggest compliment he could give you. He feels secure enough around you to talk about his interest and know that you're not going to dismiss him or make him feel bad for being excited about them. He'd likely appreciate if you gently spoke to him about keeping in mind that other people would like to talk about themselves too and their interests. And if you work together to find a balance that meant that he didn't feel ashamed, but also you could get a fair amount of speaking time in the conversation. Rejection-sensitive dysmorphia is a real issue for some of us, so make sure it's clear you're still interested in hearing about his stuff. I will say, once I learned a little bit more about autism, I definitely questioned if people have it or not when I have certain conversations, mainly online. With some of the autistic people that I have talked to, their attention to detail is insane sometimes. So much so that it can cause them to overthink a situation. For example, I was talking about comic books with this one autistic person, and they were dead serious about some errors in comic books having a significance in the book, because there was no way the company would allow that to happen. No matter how much I explained that these things happened, they just wouldn't change their mind. So I definitely take this into consideration now instead of thinking everyone online is an idiot or thick-skulled. They're surprised and disgruntled when you accept what they offered. Example, I used to be friends with someone who loved to offer stuff. I have some cute maternity clothes that would fit you. I can lend them to you if you want. I can help you rearrange your classroom. I'll come in early tomorrow. I made such a great apple pie. I can bring you a piece. These aren't things that anyone solicited. She offered them up, yet 100% expected that everyone will politely decline her offers. I'm a yes person. Anything you offer to me, I will happily accept. The look on her face when I would respond, "That would be great, thanks," was always priceless. She would never follow through with any of it, but she never stopped offering stuff, and I never stopped accepting. It was kind of hilarious. When they always play the victim card, 99% of the time, they only place themselves in the victim seat by ignoring all the efforts or costs of other people that they've had to endure and only focus on what they've had to go through themselves. I know this all too well, and when you call them out on it, you usually get hit with, "What do you mean? Where is this coming from?" Or my personal favorite, "This is all too much for me right now." Cliche answer, but I found the returning the shopping cart test to be pretty accurate. It is such a small thing, but it does tell you if a person thinks small things like that matter. This is my favorite armchair measuring of a good person. There is absolutely no benefit to you as a trolley returner, but there is a loss to other people if you don't. There's also no immediate human association like how you treat a server or retail employee. Just raw, are you thinking about the other guy? For me, it's people who listen to TikToks in public, especially in relatively silent places. There's a guy that hangs out at my favorite bar. Doesn't talk much and keeps to himself, but he sits for hours watching videos on his phone with the volume on. It's the most obnoxious thing ever. Bartender finally told him to turn the volume off or just stop watching. He was 100% oblivious to the fact that no one else in this place wanted to hear that crap. Why does it make a difference if it's a TikTok? Make it loud anything. When using your mobile on public transport, I think you should not even have key sounds. It's bad enough people don't deactivate those. Also, listening to a soccer match or whatever without bothering to use any headphones is just pure evil. I was so confused for a bit by that last comment when they said keys shouldn't have sounds. I was like, damn, you want people to silence their house keys? That's some insane entitlement right there, man. Then I realized they meant keyboard keys. My ex was insanely selfish. Her dad gave her a $20K a month allowance, plus paid for the mortgage of her penthouse in New York City, while she went to Yale. He paid her car plus insurance. She had zero need for cash. All bills are paid. He also gave her a credit card with, I'm assuming, no limit, cause we bought a car once on a whim. But I saw her steal $3 from a friend who was passed out. She'd steal panties from Walmart. She had a pile of cash in her bedroom. We once needed to pay for a delivery. I don't know if it was a bagel or pizza, but she refused to touch the pile of cash. I had to walk to my car to get cash. and when I tipped the delivery girl $10 for waiting, my ex went ballistic, calling me a B, a moron, and queer. Cause why would you give that random porky bee $10 for $5 worth of food? We went to a celeb wedding. She found a way to take 4 gift baskets as opposed to the 2 we were supposed to get. Every guest got 1. She also stole a $500 gift card to Victoria's Secret from the wedding. She was wicked greedy. One of my workmates had her drink taken from the fridge by someone else. When she put a sign up on the fridge to remind people not to take things, another guy asked her why she was doing it. She explains that her drink was taken, and without skipping a beat, he said, "Oh yeah, that's because someone took mine." So not only admitted to doing it, but his justification was that someone did it to him. So yeah, I'd say that. This is what people call paying their dues. Other people treated me poorly, so I need to perpetuate that to somehow justify it being done to me. If you don't have the same hardship, then somehow it's not fair. This is embedded to so many aspects of our society and has got to be some form of evil. The paying your dues comment is so true. At my old job, all the lifers would be so mad that I wasn't busting my balls doing extra work that wasn't in my job description. I'm not getting paid to do that extra work, so until I am, get someone in a higher position to do it. They would claim, "Young people don't know how to work anymore." Look, Grandpa, I'm sorry that I just don't bend the knee and do whatever my employer tells me to do. If the higher ups can get bonuses each year, they can afford to pay me to do more work. Trauma dumping and then not reciprocating if someone else had a bad day or felt comfortable enough to open up to them. When they go out clubbing or something and bring their friends back home to continue the party at 2 a.m. However, he lives in a share house and his roommates have to go to work in the morning. Ever since I told him to break up the party and that isn't appropriate, especially since he didn't mention to anyone that he decided to have a 2 a.m. Wednesday night party, he complied, but ever since then he's been unpleasant and unfriendly with me. Jerk. The more they ask in a relationship, the more you're having to give. That is, I think of relationships like a bridge. Generally, you should build from both sides, and in crisis you make up the difference. But a friendship is primarily meeting each other in the middle. Selfish or self-centered people pretend to build a relationship, but ask you to build the relational bridge all the way toward them. Ultimately, they expect you to build the relationship entirely towards them, and you're left giving more than receiving. When they are unable to see beyond their own needs and feelings and aren't capable of recognizing that they're impacting the people around them in negative ways. Another sign of a selfish person is when they're driven by only self-interests and don't care about how their actions might affect others. People who have kids on purpose and then act like their kids owe them, well above and beyond basic kindness and human respect, for the rest of their lives. They throw other people under the bus so fast that you get whiplash if you stand too close. Whether to save themselves or to humiliate the competition. No self-accounting at all. I love these threads. I always use them as a way to measure whether I'm doing those things or not, and fix them if I am. Made it about yourself, haven't you? You got me good. I'll end this video with a quick selfish person I used to be friends with. This guy was a master manipulator. He would reel you in with his charm and nice guy persona. He straight up offered me a chance to go to a comic convention I had always dreamed of going to. I joined his friend group, and that's when I noticed the little things he wanted people to do. He would ask people, "Are you gonna be doing this? While there, can you get this for me?" Or, "Hey, can you do this and I'll meet you there?" All these things seemed harmless and everyone helped him out because he was a nice guy. But everything was done to serve his own needs. I ended up having a falling out with this guy and was basically kicked from the friend group. Turns out everyone was extremely confused on why I was kicked out. But I found out later that he was saying some of the most messed up crap about me to this group. And basically anyone that would listen. Luckily, one of the girls in the group called BS because she was always suspicious of this guy. Months later, he kicked out another guy in the group, and that's when the girl said, "You should reach out to OP and see what really happened." We ended up getting breakfast and we kind of just said everything that was going on. Turns out this dude was bad-mouthing everyone behind their backs and was using everyone to gain something. We had an older lady in our friend group, and he would use her to jump lines at cons because she had disability access to get into things. This dude was the ultimate scumbag, and the last time I checked, he was dating a girl who oddly enough enjoys waiting in lines and has a history of being manipulated. What's the worst damage you've caused? I myself may not have caused that much material damage, But a friend of mine told me the other day how one late night he drove a van into a parking garage in a hotel in Barcelona and got stuck under the roof. Upon reversing the car, all of the roof tiles on that level came down in a chain reaction. They buried all the cars that were parked on that level. Obviously, nobody could leave the next morning, which resulted in a lot of compensation claims for missed flights and business meetings, besides all the damage that was done to the garage and many cars. It took a bunch of lawyers and insurance companies 4 years to get it all sorted out. There was a house for sale in my neighborhood that was empty for about 3 months. During that period, a group of friends and I pushed a huge freaking boulder into the deep end of the swimming pool. To be clear, it was poised right on the edge, begging to be pushed. Fast forward after a few months, a friend not involved in the incident tells me that his dad just bought a new house. Only downside is the new house has a boulder in the pool. Oops. Your friend's dad has terrible taste in real estate. He lives in a goddamn boulder stuck in a pool? I erected a tower crane with the base that was improperly engineered. 2 months later, it fell, collapsing one building, damaging 2 others, killing 1 man, injuring the operator, and shutting down the job. I think the ballpark financial end was around $20 million in damages, and it's all undisclosed. I wasn't the reason that there was a failure, but that damage was ridiculous. Trip to Spain with my high school. Beer plus dishwashing soap plus giant fountain in the middle of a town equals chaos. They closed the 4 main roads the next day. They brought in a fire truck from a neighboring town just to clean up the bubbles. Local newspaper blamed it on American tourists. We were Canadian. It freaking blows me away that nobody has done this to the Grand Haven musical fountain yet, which is the size of a football field. On a side note, I did this to our hot tub back when I was a teen, and then blamed it on the neighbor kid. Freaking bubbles everywhere. Clear out to the driveway. Took about 5 times of draining the hot tub to get all the bubbles to stop. I live in GH, and I'm sure it would be absolutely crazy if done right. From what I've heard though is that they have guys up by the pumps when the show is going to keep an eye on things. I'd imagine it would be difficult to pull off successfully. Actually, it would be very possible. You are right. We do have someone on the hill and someone in the stadium. If someone were to dump soap in it, the show would still go on. It has only been canceled like 3 times in 48 years of operation. Plus, we would most likely not notice the soap until it was too late. The nozzles aerate the water too, so the bubbles would be out of control. It just blows me away that no pranksters have tried this. But I am glad at the same time because cleanup would be hell. I think I've done this in my sink when I wash dishes. When I was 11 or 12, I went to visit my sister in Germany. We were getting ready for a dinner party that she was throwing later that night, so we were busily getting the final items we needed at the local market. It was a bit hectic. As it was a little market, they only had these tiny baskets for all of your stuff, and no carts. So she asked me to hold a bottle of champagne. As we were waiting in line, I was being a stupid kid and trying to balance the bottle on the punt, the little divot on the bottom of the bottle, on one finger. Naturally, I screwed it up and dropped the bottle. Anyone who's ever dropped a bottle of champagne knows those things explode with force and a lot of noise. This, in a foreign country, is embarrassing enough as is. But then this guy next to me cries out and collapses on the ground, clutching his knee. Blood is squirting all over the floor and making a big pool. This lady starts screaming and I just stand there not knowing what the hell happened. Turns out a shard of glass had got under the guy's kneecap and severed an artery and some ligaments. He ended up having to go to the hospital that day and have surgery. The cherry on top? Dude was a mountain climber and he was leaving to climb the Matterhorn the next day. My jaw was literally left open after reading this. I think I would hate all children if this happened to me. I used to work at a major appliance warehouse in the summer, and during my first month as a forklift operator, I came around the corner too sharp. The clamp of my lift caught the edge of a refrigerator. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The entire stack, about 60 feet high, of 10 $1,000 fridges came crashing down on top of my lift and into a subsequent stack of dishwashers. I was terrified. As the second tower came crashing down, I could hear employees screaming, "Oh no, oh no, oh yeah!" And all the other lift operators came out to watch and laugh at the damages. I proceeded to take the walk of shame to inform the damages manager. Rather than fire me, we all took hunting pictures of me holding up dead dishwashers. Estimated damage, $20,000. I've always thought you have to hit those shelves pretty hard to cause that much damage to knock them over. I used to work at a big warehouse store, and these things are usually bolted to the ground. Also, one of our shelves even had a huge dent in it and it didn't fall over. Not sure how that was allowed to fly, just for safety reasons alone. My little brother and I saw someone make and use a Molotov cocktail in some action movie. We thought it would be the coolest thing ever, and determined that we could do the same thing and be little action heroes. Our first attempt yielded disappointing results. Somehow, we neglected to realize that bottles had to be made of glass. Once that was sorted out, we tested our new creation on a big oak tree in the clearing about a mile into a forest behind our house. The bottle full of gasoline exploded just like we expected and burned that 100-foot-old oak tree down in less than an hour. We were amazed, but soon became terrified when the flaming limbs began falling off the tree and setting fire to the tall, dry summer grass nearby. The fire quickly spread to nearby trees, and we did the only thing we could think of to do: run like hell. That inferno burned for about the next 48 hours until the fire department could finally put it out. It destroyed about 40 acres of forest land, an abandoned house, a part of a horse farm, resulting in some freaked out horses and lots of charred fences. Naturally, we never came forward because we were cowardly little jerks. But we both went to volunteer for fire departments wherever we lived to atone for our stupidity and carelessness. In high school, we used to go out to my friend's farm and attempt totally awesome fire-based destruction every weekend. Our experiment with Molotovs began with my friend setting his jacket on fire by pouring fuel down the back while he was trying to throw one incorrectly. Being set on fire helps people learn. I can't say that I ever messed with fire when I was younger, outside of the occasional fireworks, but when I hear stories about people doing stuff like this, it just makes me wonder, where the hell were your parents? I accidentally blew up a 6,000-gallon tanker truck and demolished the workshop we were in. Damages amounted to about $120,000. Go on. I worked for a company in England that built and repaired tanker trucks. A 4-part compartment truck came in one day for the pipework to be replaced on the rear compartment. I had been told that the tanker was clean and vapor-free, safe to work on. I got under the rear of the truck to cut the bolt head off the bottom connecting flange with an acetylene torch. As I cut the last bolt, the flange gap opened up about an eighth, and a ring of flame came out. Before I had time to react, the rear compartment blew up, which blew out the division into the next compartment, and that exploded. All 4 compartments went off within milliseconds of each other, and the front of the tanker blew up and destroyed the truck unit. Luckily, the driver wasn't inside. The top of the tank opened up like petals of a flower, and the whole truck jumped in the air. The explosion took the roof off the top of the workshop and the supporting wall that the truck was parked next to. I was actually in the safest place, which was underneath, although I did have to change my undies. Turns out the tank hadn't been cleaned and had just came from dropping off a load. I needn't tell you that that was the last time we ever accepted a vehicle without a vapor-free certification. My father once sold a tanker truck that exploded during a pressure test. Killed a guy, sent shrapnel flying into their brand new test building. He was livid, and he couldn't figure out how the tanker exploded at 10 bar. Turns out the guy who bought it decided that he could get the truck all the way to the test center so it could bring him a few extra bucks, and he used it to deliver gas in a nearby test center. He didn't empty it with water afterwards. Gas plus oxygen equals bang. My friend worked in a seaweed concentrate factory. One of their machines is a big centrifuge, and one day, while spinning really fast, it decided to disintegrate. The machine exploded into 100 fragments of steel, which flew off into random directions, punching holes in the warehouse walls, and one embedded itself in his locker as he was running away from the carnage. Some folks are just lucky. This was one of my biggest fears when I used to work at an old automotive factory job. We had a lot of dudes that didn't pay attention to their test stands, and at any moment something could break off and cause serious damage. I experienced a couple of fires while I was there. Luckily, we caught them in time. When I was in the 6th grade, I caught a dried up tobacco field on fire. I had a knockoff of one of those Rambo knives, and for a few days I was high on the thought of being an action hero with nothing but my knife, and all the crap stuffed inside the handle. I was trying to show my sister how I could create fire with using just 2 sticks. When she wasn't looking, I snuck out a match and started a small fire, blew out the match and tossed it behind me. Of course, while we were staring at my small, deliberate fire, flames were rapidly spreading all around us. This was right off a busy highway, and suddenly there were folks all over the place swatting the fire with their floor mats. In the end, a huge chunk of the field was completely charred, and to this day, my entire family believes I was able to accomplish all of that by rubbing 2 sticks together. When my brother and I were 4 and 5 respectively, we were being little devils and refusing to go to bed when we were put there. My parents eventually gave up and just went to bed. They were exhausted as they had a dinner party that evening. I promptly went into the lounge and got out my parents' entire cassette tape collection, including the memoirs of my grandmother's escape from Germany in 1939, and proceeded to pull out all of the tape from the cassettes and play with it. My brother, in the meantime, decided that he was hungry and that he wanted a fried egg. In his 5-year-old wisdom, he got out an egg and a frying pan and put them on the stove and turned on an element. Nothing happened with the element that he was looking at, so he turned on another one. This time the heat turned on, and once the pan was hot enough, he started to fry his egg. Unfortunately, the first element he turned on had a wooden chipper board on it, which smoldered until the heat reached my mom's food processor, which promptly started burning and melting. This resulted in a lot of black smoke and fire. My brother toddled down to my parents' bedroom and said, "Daddy, why isn't there smoke in the kitchen?" And apparently my dad went from horizontal in bed to vertical and halfway down the corridor in about 2 seconds flat. The fire was quite easily put out at the expense of my parents' nice crockery that was soaking in the bucket nearby. My dad just picked it up, threw it, plates, water, and all, on the fire. In the photos of the damages that had to be taken for insurance purposes, there's a sort of twisted black mess of a stove and bench area, and then right in the middle of all of it is a perfectly cooked fried egg. I'm just interested to know if they were able to save those cassette tapes, because losing that Escape from Germany tape must be devastating. Once, while I was in college, there was this cute girl I asked to talk to. On the day results came in, I saw her sitting crying. She failed her papers and would probably be sent back. I went and checked the results. It seemed that she had passed. I ran back to her with the good news. She was very happy. We went back to check the results together. To my horror, I realized I had made a mistake earlier and she had really failed. I was speechless when she boarded the bus in tears. This story is interesting because not all damage needs to be monetary. While in college, I spent several summers working in a salmon cannery in Alaska, and for a few seasons, worked on the overnight cleaning crew. These huge Industrial Revolution-looking behemoths that cut salmon into pieces and put them in cans. The final stage of cleaning these involved climbing into the cavity under the machine where the blade assemblies normally sat. It was removed nightly for sharpening. We used thin wire picks about 12 inches long to get any last fish parts out of the machine. Inside the cavity was a big drive arm that drove the part of the machine that fed the fish to the blades. This arm sat right across your chest as you worked in the cavity, and made for a handy shelf if you needed to set down your pick for a minute. Of course, one day I left my pick on the drive arm. The line mechanic came in and installed the blade assembly, which consisted of about 16 circular blades about 3 times the diameter of a basketball, and which rotated at a ridiculously high RPM as the machine ran. So the mechanic turns on the machine only to hear a god-awful screeching sound as the pick was fed into the blades. It wiped out about half of the blades on the assembly, and with no suitable backup, I took out 1/4 of the plant's production capacity for the day. And this was a plant that processed 1 million pounds of very perishable fish per day. The head mechanic who heroically got this thing repaired by the next day pitched me a lot of crap, but never ratted me out. Homemade bomb when I was 9 years old. This all happened with my grandparents' black powder that he used to refill his shotgun shells, a battery-powered clock, a drilled-out light bulb, also battery-powered with a short fuse that attached to an element and duct taped to a 3-foot-wide oak tree. Huge explosion destroying the tree and setting fire to the field behind a nursing home. Tried to put out the fire with my jacket, which resulted in me fanning the flame. State police, helicopters, and fire trucks arrived at the scene. My grandfather smelt the fire on my clothes and dragged my butt out there to fess up to what had happened. Ain't doing that crap again. Lesson freaking learned. Excuse me? Did he not get in trouble? I mean, this kid made a bomb. I know we go pretty easy on children, but I think we should probably keep our eye on some. Not me, but 3 kids went up a hill near where I lived and decided to play with fire. They ended up burning down 40 houses, including mine. Most of the houses were leveled to the ground with nothing left but ashes. The evacuation was quick and many people lost pets and dozens of cars, and other vehicles that were also torched. My neighbors were about 12 Mexicans living in one house and they didn't believe in banks and lost all of their money, about $7,000. That was in a jar in their basement. It wasn't a rich neighborhood, but many people didn't have insurance, so people became homeless. The kids in question came from a rich neighborhood and from which I hear had no remorse whatsoever. Neither them nor their parents had to pay a single penny. Kids didn't even get a slap on the wrist from what I heard. I was just a kid and my family had to live in a car for a few days before the Red Cross came and helped us with the motel for a couple of months before we could find another place to live. It wasn't a huge town, and with 40 families looking for a place to live, it took a while to find a place. If you're ever looking to give money, the Red Cross is always a good place to give. That and community action. Rich spoiled kids not having any remorse for people that make less money than their families? Color me shocked. I almost choked a family friend to death when I was a kid. We were playing around, wrestling and roughhousing, and I locked my arms around his neck pretending to put him in a sleeper hold. I thought he was just acting when he went all limp, so I just kept clinging on his back with my arm across his throat. I had no idea that I actually choked him unconscious. Only my mom freaking the freak out alerted me to the fact that no, he wasn't pretending, and yes, he was unconscious. I'm sure he lost a few brain cells because of me. And people say wrestling is fake. A friend and I accidentally set a park on fire, which spread to an elementary school and a forest. We were too freaked out to call 911 and ended up doing a tremendous amount of damage. A colleague pushed out the wrong image update to every desktop and computer at Merrill Lynch, taking every single one out for the span of 2 to 3 days. He was fired and sued. I think the company's insurance policy was hit really hard. Conversely, one day while I was at uni, I was wasted and on a midnight snack run to the 24/7 BP service station down the road. I was wandering past a playground and noticed some flickering light in the bank underneath the play equipment. I ran over to take a look, and there were these lines of fire all throughout the park, like somebody had sprayed a kind of accelerant so that it covered a fair amount of it and then lit. I ran around and kicked the dirt all over the fire and put it out, preventing what could have been a tremendous amount of damage. In retrospect, I probably should have called the fire department afterwards in case there was something smoldering, but I was pretty wasted and paranoid. When I was a kid, I went to my cousin's house one weekend. We were playing outside when a neighborhood kid approached us, telling us that the trailer park in the adjacent property was being thrown away by the owners and that we could do whatever we wanted to. After realizing that it was locked, we proceeded to find whatever we could, hammers, crowbars, etc., to smash the locks and get inside. After multiple futile attempts to smash the locks, we started trying to find our way in by ripping giant holes in the door. We ended up screwing this trailer up pretty badly before my aunt came outside in a storming rage and stopped us. After being caught and questioned, the kid that convinced us to do it claimed that he was only doing what he was told and that he had no idea what was going on. It was his parents' trailer. This story unlocked a memory of mine. I was at a friend's house and we were trying to play soccer. Well, he was the goalie and I was trying to score. Well, turns out he wasn't a very good goalie because I probably kicked the best soccer kick of my life and it went directly into his back door, leaving a huge dent in one of the panels. I feared for my life after that, and it was safe to say that any dreams of becoming a soccer star were crushed that day. A friend of mine lived across the street from a courthouse. One night we went on the roof and started launching bananas at the courthouse with a water balloon launcher. They were all landing on the courthouse steps. Then, the most glorious shot I've ever seen. It started out as a normal shot, but it was at the halfway mark, the banana hit an updraft or something, but instead of going down, it went up. And when I say up, I mean up to the glass dome. High velocity bananas plus glass domes don't mix. The banana shattered a glass panel of the dome. All those years of shenanigans, that was the greatest. Back when I was a dumb kid living in Italy, a bunch of friends and I decided to play hide and go seek inside one of the empty villas in our parco. Since the front door was locked and there were bars on the windows, we decided to break a hole in the side of the wall. Once inside, we discovered that laborers who worked for the landlord kept their power tools in there. We went full crazy and completely destroyed everything in that house. One of us came up with the idea if we hit a big water tank outside with the pickaxe, it would explode. After being disappointed by cracking the tank in half with no explosion, we decided the only way we could cause an explosion was to pour gasoline all over the furnace. Before we had a chance to throw the sparkling stick at it, the SPs and Carabinieri showed up to ruin our fun. That's it for this video. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Link at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. It's linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching and we'll see you guys next time.